Everyone, let's call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala. Here. Councilmember Costick. Here. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Great, welcome everyone. We have no changes to our agenda this evening. Looking at our next meeting will actually be on Monday night, so a little bit of a change. We are meeting on Monday, November 18th. We will begin the meeting actually with a reception at 6:30 to 7:30 for the Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department. This year, the Volunteer Fire Department celebrates its 125th anniversary. So we hope everybody will return and will come and enjoy some cake and meet some of the volunteer firefighters and then join us for a proclamation when we begin our meeting. Our meeting on Monday night will have the proclamation, and then we have lots of presentations on Monday night. We have our police pension plan actuarial evaluation of June 30th, 2019, our FY 2019 comprehensive annual financial report, and our sustainability manager will be here for our first view as a council of our sustainability and climate action plan. Our voting session on Monday night will be the second reading ordinance approving FY 2020 Budget Amendment Number 2, a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for legal services, a resolution authorizing the closure of Laurel Avenue on May 2nd, 2020, or May 9th in the event of rain for the Tacoma Children's Business Fair. We have a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for an elevator retrofit, a single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of replacement police vehicles, a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for stormwater system video inspection and cleaning, resolution setting forth dates of the City Council's holiday recess, and a resolution providing for appointments to committees. The 18th will be our last official business meeting of 2019. Just to let you know, the reason we've switched it from Wednesday the 20th to November 18th is a number of us are going to be at the National League of Cities. Some people leaving on the 19th, some on the 20th. We will have a meeting on Wednesday, December 11th, with our District 20 delegation. This is a joint priorities meeting that I think this is the third or fourth year that we've had it. We will begin here in the auditorium at 7 p.m. There will be time for some public comments, but we ask that people sign up ahead of time for that. So it's a little different than we normally do because we do have people sign up ahead of time. And then that is it for 2019. And the council will be back on January 15th, 2020. All right. Moving forward, I think the first thing we have is an update from the Youth Council. And welcome, George.
Hello. Since my last update, we've actually only had one meeting. I scheduled these a bit too close to each other, my mistake. I think I forgot to mention this last time, I was elected officially as chairperson and Asha Henry as vice chairperson for our 2019-2020 term. So we'll continue to handle a lot of the outreach and stuff like that, making agendas, etc. I spoke with a representative of the Heather Booth film about in a bit more detail about planning a documentary screening of that film sometime in late January, and we will work more to get that scheduled and finalized and things like that. And we brainstormed a little bit about our ideas for the library renovation and what input we could have in that area. And so once we get that set in stone, we will report back. I think that's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
And congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. All right. Next, we'll have public comments on voting items. Our first voting item this evening is the second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 3, City Council. These are all changes to voting and elections in Tacoma Park. So the first one is regarding amending Article 3. Anyone have any comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move to the next voting item. This is the second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 5, which is amendment procedures. Any public comments on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the next voting item, which is the second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 6, which is registration, nominations, and elections. Any comments on that? Our next voting item is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for the purchase of trash and recycling containers. And our final voting item is a first reading ordinance approving FY 2020 budget amendment number 2. Any public comments on that? Okay. Seeing no public comments on the voting items, we'll then move into our voting session. The first is the second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 3 of the City Council. Would someone like to move the resolution? So moved. Do I have a second? Councilwoman DeBala, second. Councilmember Siemens moved. Any comments or questions?
Just a clarification, as it's on the cover page, that the word early was inserted as requested.
Great. Thank you. All right, seeing none. Since this is a charter amendment resolution, do you want to do a?
please.
Yes. Well, you want to call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, the next item is a second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 5, amendment procedures. Would someone like to move this amendment resolution? Councilwoman Searcy, do I have a second? Councilwoman Costick, any questions or comments? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next, second reading charter amendment resolution amending Article 6, registration, nominations, and elections. Have someone move this? Councilmember Siemens, second. Councilmember Kovar, any questions or comments? Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. The next is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for purchase of trash and recycling containers. We had a work session on this last week. Would someone like to move the ordinance? Councilwoman Searcy moves, Councilwoman Costick second. Any further questions or comments on this? Seeing none, since it's a single reading ordinance, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Final voting item this evening is the first reading ordinance approving FY 2020 budget amendment number 2. I don't believe there were any changes from the first, from our work session last week, so will someone move this ordinance? Councilwoman Searcy, do I have a second? Councilmember Siemens, second. Since this is the first reading, we can just do a yay or nay. All those in favor of the first reading ordinance approving FY 2020 budget amendment number 2, please say yes or yay, approve. All those in favor? Yes. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, that'll come back next week for the second reading. All right, next we'll move on to any other public comments people may have this evening.
I press this? Oh. Sue Miller, Ward 3. We don't have a Tacoma Voice anymore, or even a Gazette. Meanwhile, a lot of us feel overwhelmed by the amount of information coming at us online and may tune out. But when we walk down the street and see a flyer for a lost dog, a lemonade stand, a meeting at the firehouse, we feel closer to our neighbors. So I was shocked to see a staff proposal for a total flyer ban, and I am very relieved that council paused to reconsider this. Thank you. A few points. The proposal included not only outlawing flyers, but stiffer penalties. Please clarify the Class A, B, C, etc. offenses and why we need to criminalize free speech with stiffer penalties. The current code allows flyers in theory, but then prohibits every surface one could put them on. Is this necessary? And if so, where can we post flyers? Why are we paying staff to pull flyers off utility poles if they are not city property? We saw this happening more than once in recent weeks. Tonight's online agenda attachments omitted the current city code. That code says flyers must include the person or entity who posts them, not just a person, as is incorrectly stated and underlined in the staff overview. Last month, staff attributed the need to ban flyers to visual blight and safety hazards, and the bizarre racial equity statement asserted that all residents would benefit when we know that online access is not equal. These ban arguments lack credibility. It's hard not to see this as part of a pattern of overreaching by staff without consulting council or residents. In regards to banning commercial flyers, I remember losing money buying organic lemons for my kids to squeeze and sell. Is this what we're preventing? Or teens walking dogs for elderly neighbors? Or young families recycling clothing at yard sales while our consumer culture drags us into the climate crisis? Why wouldn't we be supporting these kinds of flyers? The attorney asks you to balance council's alleged interest in limiting signs, litigation concerns, and burden of enforcement, and the public's First Amendment rights. Here in Tacoma Park, of all places, let's make First Amendment rights our guide star. Free the flyers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments this evening?
I missed you all. Oh, my Tacoma Park family. You know I'm going to start with community first. All right. Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, there's certain things they don't protect. Defamation, truth threats, fighting words, obscenities, misleading commercial that mislead in advertisement. Ironically, they don't protect against general misleading political speeches. That's not an ironic thing. Threats to freedom of speech, writing, and action, though often trivial in isolation, are cumulative in their effect, and unless checked, lead to a general disrespect of the rights of a citizen, George Orwell. When speech condemns a free press, and I'll modify freedom of expression, you are hearing the words of a tyrant, Thomas Jefferson. Come on, this is common sense. We don't need to ban flyers in Tacoma Park. Not really. I understand there were some lawsuits in other places. Well, because the violations that occur in other places don't mean that we have them here necessarily in Tacoma Park. We have to look at our community first. And if we look at our community first, how often does that occur in our community? So if we're not looking at our community to serve our community first, then we need to look at this, because we don't need to have a ban on expression of freedom at any point in time. I wouldn't be able to speak the way I'm speaking right now. We wouldn't be able to have this discord of differences of opinion. It wouldn't be here. So putting some sign up on a pole or wherever it can be placed in a public setting, understanding that the legalities of lawsuits and things that may come, doesn't mean that we stop the freedom of expression just because people have a difference of opinion. So I say that if you would consider in your discord, as we may have differences of opinion, but at least we're allowed to express them. Whether they're placed on poles or whether they're placed on walls or stuck on banners, so what? If you ban freedom of expression, it's a clear violation of some things that would be considered freedom of speech. So consider, just because somebody has some legal something in another area, okay, they're suing other people for other things all over the country, and they will continue to do so. Coffee's hot, people get sued for it. French fries are cold and they get sued for it, okay? But it doesn't mean we ban using coffee or drinking. Nor do we ban the freedom of expression. And since I have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I did miss talking to you guys. Remember, community first, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Hello, Jackie Moore, Ward 2. I'm also here to speak about the flyers. I brought with me a book called The Big Orange Splot by Daniel Manus Pinkwater. Some of you with kids may have read it to them. And it's about a man who lives on a very, very neat street. And everybody all the neighbors love living on a neat street. And then one day, a seagull flies by and leaves a big orange spot on his roof. So he goes to bed, he has a dream that night, and the next day, his house, he starts to turn it into what his dreams look like. And one by one, the neighbors come by. It's like, oh, Plum Bean, you've lost your mind. What's going on? And so he has a conversation with them one-on-one. And the next thing you know, each person goes the next day and builds their house of their dreams. And although it may look cluttered and funky, that's how I think of Tacoma Park. Mm-hmm. And although this is more about houses than flyers, taking the flyers away, I don't want that kind of neat street. I just don't. Thank you.
Gee, I wish I were channeling Daniel Pinkwater. This is a slightly darker subject. Susan Schreiber, Ward 1. I'd like to speak to concerns about Montgomery County Council member Hans Riemer's bill to relax county restrictions on cell towers in residential neighborhoods. Over the past year, our city worked to pass our own strong ordinance on behalf of the people of Tacoma Park. I hope you, the mayor and council, will build on this accomplishment and take a strong position against weakening public protections at the county level. Allowing cell towers to be installed as close to residences as 30 feet, as opposed to 50 in our own ordinance, is to gamble with our health and that of our children and grandchildren in a world in which corporations intent on making a profit frequently work to minimize important emerging science regarding the impact of changing technology on our lives. In claiming that 5G poses no risks, Councilmember Riemer is relying on information that's 5 years old. Instead, an article in the October issue of Scientific American is titled, "We Have No Reason to Believe That 5G is Safe," and documents that over 260 scientists from 40 countries have signed the 5G appeal, stating that numerous recent scientific publications have shown that electric and magnetic fields affect living organisms at levels well below most international and national guidelines. Effects, they say, include increased cancer risk, cellular distress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic changes, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans. This is scary stuff. Damage, it says, goes well beyond the human race, as there's growing evidence of harmful effects to plant and animal life. I hope the mayor and members of the council will attend the hearing on November 19th, the county council hearing, and speak out forcefully against weakening the current ordinance. And in addition, please write a letter to the county council so that there will be no doubt in the minds of the county council and the residents of Tacoma Park that we as a community are standing strong on this issue. Thank you.
Ms. Schreiber, sometimes it's really easy to answer a question. I'll just say, it's done. The letter was circulated and we're sending it on Friday morning. I'm not sure if anyone will be able to actually testify. As I mentioned before, we're going to the National League of Cities, but thank you for your testimony this evening.
Colleen Cordes, Ward 1, and I also wanted to speak about the cell tower issue. Thank you very much for that. That was one of the things that, on behalf of Community Vision for Tacoma, we were going to ask that you would do both of those things. Writing the letter, that's going to be really very powerful. Really, your voice will be very powerful on this issue. And we also hope that at least someone from the council or that you, Mayor Stewart, might be able to actually testify at the hearing, because that would also be very powerful. And then the second issue is the Park Ritchie issue. And I, again, on behalf of Community Vision for Tacoma, we just want to urge you, we thank you for the letter, again, that made a big impact. And Ms. Braithwaite's participation in the Tower Committee made a big impact too. What we're really, really hoping that you will now use your power and your authority for is to work with the county to get an on-site comprehensive audit of what is happening at Park Ritchie in terms of a real radio frequency radiation study, not just assurances of where things are in compliance with FCC limits, but really do some measurements across the roof, an independent study on the roof, the top floors, the windows, the vents where there will be holes in the roof, other floors, the perimeter of the building, really do a study. And in terms of the warning signs that see, you know, who has access to the roof, who has keys, what's the penthouse used for, where are the warning signs, what languages are they in? Are they in Amharic and are they in Spanish? Are there physical barriers? Where are the physical barriers now? Because we really don't have a sense of currently what the situation is there, but there certainly seems reason to be concerned. And then the other part of this is for the residents to be fairly informed of the application that's before the Tower Committee and also this RF emission study that predicted excessive levels. And what we don't know is what are the current levels, and the residents have a right to know that, again, in languages that are their preferred language. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening, Cynthia Mariel. I too want to speak on our need for advocacy, both by community residents as well as our elected leadership here in Tacoma Park on the issue of cell tower placement closer to private residences than our Tacoma Park resolution allows, although the county, with Hans Remer at the lead, is proposing a change that would allow for cell tower placements much closer than we currently have in Tacoma Park. It's kind of confusing why Hans would do this, given that he lives in Tacoma Park, and this would threaten his well-being and that of his family and neighbors. I understand that the council will be away at the National League of Cities meeting. However, and I'm grateful that you've written your letter, and we certainly have gotten public attention and media attention here in the city regarding the issue of cell towers. We've gotten a lot of city attention lately, including rallies at the Lafayette Park. So what we know is our city council, in particular our mayor, when she chooses to, is a strong speaker. I watched her perform and present recently in front of the proposed site for a city children's detention center across Eastern Avenue. And she was dynamite. And you know what? I want that explosive advocacy at the county council public hearing on November 19th. And given in this day and age, we know, just as we do here at the city, if you can't be present, you can tape a testimony. And we need your advocacy, we need your leadership, we need to go to bat for our city. If this was a nuclear freeze issue, we'd be there. Why would we not be there regarding cell towers? If it's an issue about retrieving our tax dollars from the county, just as the mayor said recently at a county meeting, she's going to bat. The city's going back. Well, don't show your power on this issue. Do not compromise, because that sets precedents and we won't get our tax dollars back.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
Hello, I'm Judy Applebaum. I live on Willow. I want to say a couple of words about the flyer proposal that was surfaced a few weeks ago. First, I want to thank the council for, I think, taking off the table completely the original staff proposal to ban all flyers in the city. And I'll tell you that the main reason is that I and many residents benefit in myriad ways from flyers announcing lost pets. That happened to me. From neighborhood events, yard sales, et cetera, and I don't know of anyone who wants to ban those kinds of signs altogether, and that would have happened under the proposal. I also don't know of anyone who thinks that these kinds of signs, those kinds of signs, are contributing to quote-unquote blight, as was referenced in the original proposal, or to public safety concerns. I do understand that the city attorney has a concern about treating different categories of signs differently, as our code currently does, in that it bans some commercial ads, but not all, and that potentially raises First Amendment concerns under a 2015 Supreme Court decision. But the original staff proposal, in my view, was a gross overreaction to that perceived problem or potential problem. The town's regulation that was at issue in that case was different from our city's regulation, and it's not entirely clear what the court would do with ours. I think that's reflected in the city attorney's memo. That decision came down 4 years ago, and if no one has complained about the unconstitutionality of our code, I think you could leave it alone and see if that's a problem, and before you try to revise it. If you do want to eliminate any risk of running afoul of the Constitution under that 2015 decision, frankly, it's nonsensical to do it by banning more speech than is currently banned. That is, by expanding the current ban on commercial ads to ban all for-profit and nonprofit signs. That would be harmful to the community, and ironically, I think it would arguably impose a greater burden on our First Amendment rights than the current code imposes. After all, commercial speech receives less constitutional protection than non-commercial speech. So I just want to conclude by saying that if any action is needed to deal with clutter, with too many signs in some places or at some times, there's an obvious solution, which is to apply so-called time, place, and manner restrictions for all category of signs on public rights of way. And the code already has a number of those, so you could start with those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening. My name is Larry Silverman at Birch Avenue. The topic is trees and climate, and the message is SOS. That should be the message emanating from every one of you and from this building to all parties who might be able to render some aid. There are very dark storm clouds in front of us. We have really old trees. They've reached their time. We have changing weather, scary weather. We just have a lot of issues coming our way, and I think we need some help. Now, this is not just a Tacoma Park problem. Baltimore lost 10% of its trees, the emerald ash trees, very beautiful trees. They liked them so much they planted a lot. They're all going, and when trees go, they don't just go poof and disappear. Someone's got to cut them down. It's thousands of dollars. Sometimes people who can't afford it. Sometimes cities who can't afford it. So this is all coming. So we need help. So where do you get help? Well, how about, let's say, the people who are building the Purple Line? Now, they're cutting down a lot of trees. How many trees are they planting? If I cut down a tree, you guys are going to tell me I have to plant, I don't know, how many, 10, 20? Maybe they should be planting maybe 5,000 in Tacoma Park and Silver Spring and wherever they go. What's wrong with that? There's the Department of Agriculture. There's an extension service at the University of Maryland. How much time have you guys spent with them, and how much help have they been giving you? How many visits have you had from the Maryland Department of Agriculture forester, 2 foresters assigned to Montgomery County? How much help are they giving the city? there are resources there. I think you need someone, as sort of a spearhead, a person who's got to spearhead this thing. You really need a major lobbying effort to get the resources you need to come up with a plan for our forest in this city, not just to preserve the old things which we love, but to keep our forest vibrant for the next 50 or 100 years. You need that plan, and you need to carry it out. And an arborist, with all due respect, who's signing permits and so on, he's a team member, but he ain't the team, and he's not the leader. So I think you need some leadership, and it's got to come from you. And I mean, the basic premise of this is that the city of Tacoma Park wants to participate in the future of our community in terms of trees and climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
Oh, I have documents.
Oh, this is scary.
Not like usual.
All right.
Good evening, Donna Victoria, Merwood Drive, Ward 6, loyal constituent of Talisha Searcy. I would like to draw the council's attention to the Glenside Drive Stormwater Management Project, which was, I believe, supposed to start construction this week and has been delayed because they're waiting on some material delivery. But it's pretty much finalized and ready to go. Unfortunately, I had to look at it as I was moving plants out of the way that we had planted in the park, and started looking and comparing the plans we saw about a year ago. I have the printout of the December 2018 plans here, and specifically the intersection at Jackson and Glenside Drive is where the worst flooding occurs. And the water in a downpour can flow over ankle high. It has been, 6 to 8 inches in a really bad storm. And it drains, it's 3 very steep hills that all come to the bottom at the Paper Road and Footbridge at Jackson, okay? And I find it very curious that the current plans that are up on the website for the city, the rain garden is now treating a total drainage area of 0.22 acres. And a year ago, there was a rain garden and drainage area that was going to treat 3/4 of an acre. So did not have time to call Ian today and try and get clarification. I was jammed at work all day. And I will do that. If I hear from him, I'll let people know. But I'm not an engineer. I'm not an expert in these things, but I do live with one. And he's tired of spitting into the wind on best practices, so he's at yoga tonight instead of here. But I've walked this road for 25 years with my dogs, and I just look at this plan and I don't think it's gonna work. They're putting an enormous amount of water into pipes that are then going to a scour hole right where the park's property starts. The scour hole is only 12 inches deep and is supposed to hold 6 inches of water. We have 10 acres of mostly impervious surface coming down, being shoved into a pipe, and it's just going to blow out and fail, I'm pretty positive. And there's no explanation for why the plans are now only draining 1/4 acre instead of 3/4 of an acre. This is an expensive project. We won't get another one. It's probably $250,000, I think, roughly. And I'd hate to see it fail in its first year because what the Park Service already did failed. And I know, engineers will bully you into saying this works, but I don't see any sense that this is going to work. So I would hope we could take another look at it and get some explanation out of Public Works for plans that just don't seem to deal with reality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any other public comments this evening?
Hi, everybody. My name is Laird Hart. I'm in Ward 1, and I was concerned about the flyer issue. I am not online, and frankly, the way I found out about this was because of a flyer that I saw on a phone pole on Carroll Avenue. And my immediate reaction was it was a just a terrible idea. Now, I'm embarrassed to admit I haven't seen the current wording, and I gather that you've made some amendments to it. But first of all, I don't think this is a problem. If you look at any phone pole on Carroll Avenue, I think you're going to find 300, 400, 500 staples showing that we've had a lot of use of phone poles for communication over the years. And I'm not aware of anybody that had any concern about it. I guess the staff concern is blight. Frankly, if it were a sterile neighborhood where people didn't communicate with each other, I think that would be more blighted than the world that we live in. And frankly, without knowing the current wording, it seems to me that the real concern is political speech. And any whiff of a control of political speech is going to raise obvious First Amendment problems. And you can't solve that by saying, well, it's going to apply across the board to all kinds of speech, because frankly, then you're going to have differential enforcement. I cannot imagine that city officials are going to go around taking down flyers for lost pets or yard sales. I have heard hearsay of city officials taking down flyers for community meetings. That's something I heard about last spring, and it concerns me an awful lot. You should not ban that kind of expression. And even if there were an issue about blight, it seems to me that the way you deal with that is by saying, if you're going to have an ordinance on flyers at all, which frankly I don't see any need for, you would say something like, you can't put up something that's permanent. You can't have a permanent use of a phone pole for a business. It's going to be, day in, day out. But anything that's for an upcoming meeting or a yard sale or a lemonade stand or something, it's short term. That's the highest and best use, frankly, of the phone poles, at least at ground level. So I hope you don't pass anything that's going to lead to litigation. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening? Okay, then we will move on then to council comments. Councilmember Kovar.
I'm first.
Your light went off first. Sorry.
Thank you, appreciate it.
I'm just going to start going down.
Just wanted to mention a couple of things. We had a presentation earlier from 6 to 7 or so from the representatives from the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. It was the Montgomery County office of that group, and there was a presentation on how some of the procedures that they use for the assessments, and several of us and several residents asked questions about how that works and some of the confusing patterns that we've seen with the most recent data. And I don't want to go into great detail on it now. I just was struck by the fact that it doesn't seem like, or my opinion, I shouldn't say it's a fact, my opinion is that it doesn't seem like the system that they use accurately captures, even understanding that there has to be some generalization when you assess vast numbers of properties. It doesn't seem like it captures everything that's going on in Tacoma Park. So we're not going to do anything about that tonight, but I would suggest to my colleagues maybe we can do some follow-up with them just to try to get a few more clarifications, and so that's something I'll talk about later. With respect to the cell tower information, I appreciate those who came forward to talk about that. For whatever set of reasons, I'm not actually attending the National League of Cities conference, and I'm hoping that I may be able to testify. I'm just trying to work out my schedule. If I can, I will. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but it's premature. It's premature to do that. But if I can, I probably shouldn't have said that. But I'm hoping to be able to. And then I know the city manager is going to be talking about this on the Merrimack Avenue cell tower installation. There was a really complex memo from the Committee on the Environment, and I will say I absorbed a lot of it. I'm not sure I absorbed all the footnotes. It does contain information worth considering. I know the city manager is going to be talking about this shortly, and there may be a sense that, at least from a technical point of view, our staff is of the opinion that it more or less meets the criteria for receiving the permit. But I'd like to see some response to the key points from the Committee on the Environment, if we can, before we go down that pathway. And also, and I don't know if this applies, but if it's a specific installation, whether our ordinance's requirement for a community meeting would apply, and if so, we should do that beforehand. So if you could respond to those things when the time comes, I would appreciate it. Thanks.
I see no one, okay, Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, we're going down the line here tonight. First, I'd like to thank the the Scouting Troop 33 for the opportunity to flip a bunch of flapjacks. It was actually a really good evening, and I enjoyed myself greatly. And they raised a lot of money. A couple of regional things and a couple of local things. So regionally, I'm a chair of the COG, Metropolitan COG Chesapeake Bay group, which is meeting on Friday, and the topic will be municipal stormwater programs at my request. So I'll bring back what we've got, and hopefully it'll be good. And tomorrow I'm going to an all-day climate leadership meeting that Sustainable Maryland is organizing, and at least one of the members of the Committee on the Environment is coming with me, and I don't know who all else. So that should hopefully be something we can bring back. Again, bring back some info for what we're doing on Monday. And I have been appointed to the COG Legislative Committee, and that meets for the first time tomorrow at noon during the lunch break on the other thing. But the point being, if anybody has anything to say about the COG materials from any of the committees that you're on, please let me know, particularly on transportation, Casey, because there's a whole section that they sent out on draft legislative stuff. Two local things. We've talked a little bit with staff about Flower and Carroll avenues and trying to get a response from SHA on the crosswalks and the safety issues associated with that. In attempting to do that, we have gotten a response on the other missing crosswalk over by the Washington and Venice University that goes from, it's on Carroll, and it's halfway down the block to the parking lot, and it's been out for forever. And so apparently that Public Works went today with SHA to take a look at it, and hopefully it'll be fixed soon. It looks like I've got the hot news here. Yeah, that's what I heard this morning when I was talking about the other issue. And then the second local issue is that there is a change in the light tower at the Pepco substation just across the border on New Hampshire Avenue in Prince George's County that is affecting a lot of people's sleep in Ward 2 and presumably also in Prince George's County.
And in Ward 3.
And Ward 3.
I've heard from some
And Ward 3.
people.
You see it from, okay, so really is the top of the hill, bottom of the hill thing. Yeah, so Public Works Director and I sent a note today to the Pepco coordinator hot off the presses, sent a note to the Pepco coordinator for the project to figure out who we need to talk to. Why did they change it? Is there something we can do about it? So those are the two local updates, and thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Councilwoman Kostick.
Thank you. And Councilmember DeBala, if you could send me those legislative, that would be helpful. I'll take a look. Thank you.
A couple hours ago.
Thank you. Just a couple of updates. I had a chance last night to attend Old Tacoma Business Association meeting where the Tacoma Park Police had 4 officers, and they talked about general safety in the commercial area and in Tacoma Park as a whole. And I just want to thank the police for being there and really just providing extremely comprehensive information, talking really in depth about some of the programs that they have and new initiatives to work more with the community. So it was really great to hear all the information. So thank you. I've mentioned before, but I just wanted to give an update on a committee that I chair at COG called the Access for All Committee, which is working on a recommendation from its members to local jurisdictions throughout the metropolitan area on the e-scooters that are pretty widespread throughout the area, And committee members have a lot of concerns about the safety of the scooters. The purpose of the Access for All Committee is to focus on traditionally underrepresented communities in transportation. So there are a lot of members who work with the disabled community and themselves have disabilities. And so there's a lot of concern about e-scooters being parked in the middle of sidewalks, people tripping over them, not having access, as well as just safety with them driving, people zooming by on sidewalks when people are walking. So we are working on compiling some general concerns that committee has, and we'll be sharing that with the TPB, the Transportation Planning Board, as well as with Montgomery County and some of the other counties around the region. And I think there might be some really interesting and useful outcomes from that we could advocate to the county on, and we could maybe consider here as well in terms of looking for adding additional parking spaces for those scooters or working with the companies so that they are providing docks and encouraging people to dock their scooters when possible. And then finally, on the area of transportation as well, the city's Complete Safe Streets Committee is having a meeting tomorrow night here in the community center in the hydrangea room. From 7 to 9 p.m. The meetings, as always, are open to the public, and this meeting in particular might be an area of interest. There will be a presentation from the county as well as from the police department. One of the officers will present on crash data in the area. So there should be some good discussion and some information coming out of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
A couple things. First, I would like to remind my colleagues that tomorrow is the joint Montgomery County and Prince George's County Maryland Municipal League meeting here at the community center. So I hope everyone can attend that does not have a conflict. This is a great opportunity to talk about our legislative priorities for our chapter and see how they relate to what's going on in Prince George's County. I will be attending the National League of Cities Conference. The committee that I'm on, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, is having their formal meeting. It should be a great opportunity to see what's going on across the nation, and we will see what our legislative priorities are and how we can advocate for those up on Capitol Hill. And I also signed up to ride in an autonomous vehicle. So, yeah, so this should be interesting.
Take it back, what do we do?
Yesterday, I had a meeting at Essex House Apartments, and this is something I want to bring to my colleagues' attention, that we need to evaluate not just when we give large apartment owners the option to exit out of our rent stabilization program, but what happens if they are not providing the quality of housing or the services that they should be providing to tenants, or they're even contemplating rent increases that many tenants do not feel are fair. How can we claw back that exemption? I think that is something that as a council that we need to look at very seriously. The residents at Essex House have been having a very difficult time with their landlord for many years. Myriad of issues, whether it's hot water in a number of apartments in the building. Some apartments didn't have water. There was recent court cases today trying to evict people that received vouchers. These people did not receive word from the government that their amount of their rent had changed, that they were required to pay, even though they didn't receive any of this documentation. Rather than the landlord coming in and meeting with them to try to figure out how that they can fix the situation, they took them to court. So we got to figure out a way that we can reel in this landlord. This is just not fair for residents. So I hope my colleagues will join me and we can look at how we better maintain that exemption for property owners in this city. Thank you.
Ms. Ludlow, given what Councilmember Smith just said, we've met before, I've met before with the owners and the property managers. I'd like to direct Grace Wiggins to call a meeting immediately with me. I was not aware of this situation, and I would like to have a meeting immediately with the owners and the property managers of that building. Thank you. Councilwoman Searcy?
Good evening, everyone. So it's been a busy week. So on Friday, I had the opportunity, along with our economic development manager, Samira Cook-Gaines, to attend the Affordable Housing Conference in Montgomery County session on Opportunity Zone Benefits, Promises, and Challenges. It was a great opportunity to hear from various groups, folks in the banking industry and how banks are dealing with opportunity zones, as well as developers and what are some of the challenges that they're experiencing or they see. Also from the perspective of Hans Reamer was there. There were folks that were talking about opportunity zones from the perspective of state legislation and benefits, as well as what Montgomery County might be doing. Mark also attended as well. So it was a great chance for us to just hear a little bit more about what folks at various levels are seeing on the ground in terms of taking advantage of opportunity zone designations and ways in which we can make some connections with others. And it's particularly important as we're having conversations about the recreation center and how that project will move forward and how we might be able to leverage our opportunity zone designation in an effective way. So was really happy that Samira was there and actually posed a really, really interesting question about how could you turn crowdsourced funding into a potential opportunity zone fund source. So, and it actually sparked a lot of discussion amongst attendees about that possibility. So hopefully we'll see some more traction there. Also, I just want to thank again staff from the state Maryland Department of Planning, the mayor, city manager, as well as Samira and Roz were able to sit down with them again for a second time. I know, it's been amazing on Friday to talk about some of the city's planning needs. Susan LaRue is their new regional planner for the Maryland Capital Region, and it was great to just have a chance to sit down with them to one, learn a little bit more about what potential programs may be available for us, but two, to just pick their brains about what we may need to put in place for development to really get started in terms of the rec center site, but also other things that we may want to consider as we're talking about New Hampshire Avenue in its entirety. So definitely look forward to continuing to have conversations with them. I think it was a really, really helpful discussion. Next, last night, I have the chance to attend the New Hampshire Gardens Community Association neighborhood meeting. We spent a lot of time talking about traffic concerns, and I know many of you might have seen the rapid fire emails that were going last night. So residents that attended that meeting, thank you so much. I have been following up with staff. Jesse has graciously agreed to help those who want to submit petitions for speed bumps and helping people figure out how many doors to knock in order to meet the quota for petitions. But I'll send a more comprehensive email out on the listserv just in summary so folks kind of know some of the questions that were raised and some of the answers. And thank you, Chief Duvall, for the response on speed limit questions and things like that. So we'll put some things together and I'll run it by staff just to make sure I didn't miss anything, and we'll send it out to residents. Next, I just want to say kudos to the Crossroads Crossroads Development Authority, sorry, got community on the brain, and the new mural that is at the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Center alleyway. So, and that's just off of New Hampshire Avenue, near University Boulevard. But yeah, so we have a new mural there, and definitely excited about being able to continue to work on beautification projects for the commercial district. So definitely kudos to Kaylee for moving that forward. And tomorrow they will have a neighborhood advisory group meeting, so I will be attending that. For those who are not aware, the Crossroads has tried to convene a group of residents in the neighboring communities together to just kind of talk about some ways that we can increase patronage of the businesses in the Crossroads area. Lastly, I just want to say thank you to Christy Buck, who was the Crossroads Food Network Executive Director and is stepping down. Really, really, really appreciate all of the hard work that she has done, and particularly the partnership that she's had with the city as it relates to the residents, many of which are in Ward 6. So just want to publicly say we really appreciate all of the work that she's done. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, I just have a couple of things. Tomorrow night is busy. In addition to the meetings that my colleagues have already mentioned, at Tacoma Park Middle School at 7 p.m. there is a free event with the Parent Academy on connecting with LGBTQ youth. You do need to register for it, but I would highly encourage folks to attend that if they have time. Last night, I was with our delegate Wilkins to talk about the 2020 census, and Donna Wright, who's on our staff here, and we came up with so many good ideas last night. It was a great meeting, and looking forward to implementing some of the ideas on how we make sure we have a full count in Tacoma Park. Just to highlight the importance of this, if we get every person who is undercounted is $18,000 that we miss from the community. That's money that goes into hospitals, roads, clinics. The groups that some of us may think are generally undercounted, renters, immigrants. But the other thing I learned last night is children under 5. Across the board, children under 5, people don't count them. And this is for 10 years. And so if you miss a child under 5, by the time we get to count them again, they're a teenager and in middle school or high school. So we really want to get the word out about making sure we have a full count here in Tacoma Park, and be on the lookout. We're going to be talking a lot more about it. And I'm thankful for the leadership of Delegate Wilkins on this issue. So let's see, what else? We went to the pancake supper from the Boy Scouts. In addition, PAC 33 continued the tradition of laying a wreath on the memorial for Veterans Day. I want to thank our police officers for attending that as well, and very much want to thank PAC 33 for continuing that. We also had sorry that Ms. Schreiber left. Her granddaughter was here, she and I got to attend a birthday party on the mall that got quite a bit of attention this past weekend. Some good attention and some not so great attention. It's kind of interesting, but overall it's really good. And today is World Kindness Day, so I'm just focusing on that and not paying attention to whatever else is in my Twitter feed right now. As we said, I circulated a letter that the council has agreed to send to Councilmember Reamer and Albanaz regarding ZTA 19-07, and I'm glad to hear my colleague may be able to testify on that. Because I will be at the National League of Cities conference. I co-chair the Racial Equity and Leadership Council and was asked actually to present on a panel on housing and racial equity with Mayor Pro Tem in Dallas and a city councilman in Boston. So we get to be on a panel with Boston and Dallas and National League of Cities talking about our housing policy. It's pretty cool. Today was our COG board meeting, and along with Council President Nancy Navarro, myself, and representatives from Prince George's, we got to talk about our housing plans and the fact that a number of the jurisdictions in the region have made a commitment to the housing targets that the COG board passed in the fall. So that is also happening. And I think that's it for me. The city manager?
Thank you. I think you can get a hint from the things the council members have said that it's been really busy lately. My meetings have been completely packed for the last 2 weeks, so I appreciate that. As part of that, though, there were a couple things that were mentioned that I had not heard of. So when you have information, email me, let me know so that I'm on top of things, because there is a lot being juggled. And I appreciate that part of the reason that it's heavy is that we're going to have council going on recess soon, and so we're trying to accomplish a lot. Wanted to clarify, we followed up with a question that was raised by a resident at the last meeting about the Montgomery County Development Review process. We did check about the Tacoma Junction project. It is not likely to go back through a Public Development Review Committee meeting. That usually happens just once. And so that's happened already. The only time that it comes back for a second full process is if it's been dormant for a very long time, or if it's completely different, not just with the changes that were recommended. So it is unlikely to be another DRC meeting before the project goes to the planning board. At the planning board, obviously there'll be a public hearing, and the city council will have seen it before at that time.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Have you finished talking about it first? I didn't want to.
Well, we still need to get the
Oh,
comments from SHA.
Right.
And so that's something that's still outstanding.
So the only thing that struck me was, pardon me, it has been dormant for some time, and.
No, it's been going through the HBC.
Okay, but in terms of the DRC involvement, they haven't been doing much, right? And
No, the various agencies, like the fire department and everybody, they continue to be going back and forth.
But it just
meeting the
hasn't been a
various
public process.
But
is
it's
what
not
you're
a, but it's,
saying.
no,
Okay.
it's not. That's been
No,
public,
I'm talking about the
but in terms of
DRC
the other
specifically.
agencies, this is meeting the criteria that were raised through the public DRC process. Now it's working through those comments.
Okay.
One of the items that happened while everything else is happening very fast around here is some information, and it's short here, but we'll get more information to you, Councilmember Kovar, on 902 Merrimack. We've been going through the Public Works Director has been going through the application for the telecom antenna at 902 Merrimack, has been having extensive research and discussions, considering particularly the Committee on the Environment requests and questions, and has determined that the permit conditions have been met. We'll give for more information at a later time, but I just wanted to make sure that it was understood that I just want to keep you up to date that that has been our determination. We'll get full information to you. Yes, ma'am.
So there were some things that came up during the community meeting about translation of notifications and a few other things. And we had talked about revisiting our ordinance to make sure
Right.
that folks, future applicants, are aware.
That's right.
So where are we with that?
I think that that's something that has been essentially adopted administratively so that we have that information in terms of language. If there were anything that needed to change to the ordinance, we'd have to bring that back.
Right. So all of those things have now been clarified? No.
No? Okay. Again, I'm not prepared to discuss
No
this, so I'm
worries.
just letting you know.
It's all right.
Yeah, just my understanding, we're following the language of the ordinance and the regulations. So some
Correct.
of the issues that were raised, particularly multiple languages, is not in the regulations or ordinance. So it's my understanding that would have to change from the council
From the
in order
council.
to be
It would-
addressed.
That's what I thought.
But the folks who were bringing it forward said that they would be willing to do the multiple languages.
Correct. So,
Oh,
but
the applicant.
the applicant
Yeah.
as a courtesy.
Right.
But my understanding is, as a courtesy is great, but we should make it.
I guess my
something-
question was, sorry.
No, make it something that would be written in the code that we would want to see happen.
Right, but do we need in the code, my question to the city attorney is, or could that be in the admin regs? Because
So
then we
it-
could, if it's in the admin regs, we can
We
move
don't
on it
have
right
to-
away.
right.
If it has to be in the code, then we have to open up the code again, so.
Right, the other, and so we'll follow
Yeah.
the city attorney's advice on that. You know, the other part of this is this has been the only one that we've had so far. And so part of this was to see how things go, so we find out if there's more information that's needed, and other changes that might be needed. So we're down one so far. And so as we go through this process, there may be something else that comes up that we want to adjust.
So just two things. I was under the impression, and I said before community meeting, I meant community notification. I was under the impression that Crown Castle had agreed to do it in this case as a supplemental translated document. I think that was what
Yeah.
Councilwoman Searcy is referring to. So can we find out if they've done that?
I'll find out.
Yeah. And the second thing is, and I don't know if my colleagues agree with me or not, but since it is the first one and there's these very complex points, as I mentioned, with regard to the Committee on the Environment, it would be really helpful to me, and I hope to all of us, if we could see the responses to those points before a permit gets signed, if that's in fact what's going to happen.
Okay.
That would be my request.
Okay. Continue. Last week, Councilmember DeBala requested information on bikeway projects. So we have links here to our various bikeway programs. A lot is going on, and a number of these are wonderful programs funded by Maryland Bikeways programs and others. It's also been part of the discussion that we hope to continue to have with State Highway and as we go forward, especially related to New Hampshire Avenue. As you'll note this evening, and we discussed it last week, that Budget Amendment Number 2 includes an item recognizing the receipt of funds for the current fiscal year on one of the matches for the Bikeways program. One thing, again, because this is getting to the end of the session of the council, we don't have time to come to you with a proposal for removal of some additional trees as a purchasing item. This is similar to what you just passed a few weeks ago. But we have an additional number of about 9 trees that need to be removed and some that need pruning. And we do not want to wait until January or February with the condition of these trees. And so I do have the authority under the charter to do emergency purchasing while and inform you of the amounts of that. We'll be doing it the same process that we did the previous version, and we hope to come back to you also with an indefinite quantities agreement with a tree company so that we don't have to come to you for each time we need to take down a number of trees. So that was our old process, but we hadn't gone through the RFP process for that. So we will follow all the processes in terms of information about where the trees are and note all the notification procedures. We've noted them here briefly, but there may be a couple extras that get added to that list.
So this says that several are in Forest Park, and those are oaks, at least most of them are. And based on what we heard at the oak tree session, they need to come down sooner rather than later to keep from spreading into the wooded area and back. So I think
I
this is
can't
great.
speak to these particular trees, but they are determined that they need to come down quickly. I mentioned last week right of first refusal properties, but I didn't have it in the city manager comments written, so they're included here. 7333 New Hampshire Avenue, one of the units, and 116 Lee Avenue, one condo unit. That's what I have for you this evening.
All right. Moving on to our work sessions. The first is a discussion of closure of Laurel Avenue on May 2nd, 2020, or May 9th in the event of rain for the Tacoma Children's Business Fair. This will be their second one. I guess they did one last year, but did not actually close the area. They're looking at closing it at 6 a.m. to 3 p.m.
We want to close Laurel Avenue.
Yeah, close Laurel Avenue. This is a one-time event. The organizers of the event have come to an agreement with the Tacoma Park Seventh-day Adventist Church, located on Laurel Avenue. Just as a reminder, the Seventh-day Adventists have their day of worship on Saturday, so we wanted to make sure that it was not going to interfere with their services. Per the signed agreement with the church, the event will have no sound system for the entire duration of the fair, and the noise will be kept to a minimum between 9 and 1 p.m. This is the second year, as I said.
And it does take council action to close the street.
Right. The fair inspires children to discover their inner entrepreneur. Children ages 6 to 14 are invited to create a product or service and sell it to customers at a one-day market. Prizes will be given for the best businesses by age and category. To participate, young entrepreneurs submit an application and then begin to build a product or service. They plan their business at every level: product, service, marketing, accounting, cost of goods, pricing, and more. So this is coming to us because, as the city manager said, we need council action to close the street. Anybody have any questions? Councilwoman Costick.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the organizers of the event. It's a really great event, and I had a chance to attend last year, got to taste wizard tea. I still have some of my hair ties from it that I bought there and some keychains and things. It's really neat to see the young people out being entrepreneurs and trying things out. So I'm very supportive of the street closure, and I also think it's a great opportunity to use streets for something other than cars. So I hope we'll move forward with this.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I wasn't able to attend last time. It sounds like a good event. The only question I had, and I don't know who can answer this, the school itself is from the district and not from close by. And so is this something that's specifically for residents of Tacoma Park, or is there a way of ensuring that that's a lot of who participates, or?
I believe it's for residents of Tacoma Park. It's open, it was open to, yeah. All.
Yeah, but the organizers are from Tacoma Park, and
Yeah.
you know, last year, many of the, if not, I don't know if all, many of the people who participated, I think, were.
Well, that would
from
be my
Tacoma
only thing.
Park.
If we're going to close off the street, I would want it to be something that would be for the city or people right in the area, as opposed to the school itself is over in Foggy Bottom. That was the only question I had. So if there's a way to ensure that that's the case.
I don't think we need to. Yes.
I could just weigh in really quick. I'm also. Hi, good evening. I'm one of the organizers, along with my good neighbor Holly Chang. She's Ward 3. I'm in Ward 6. And so, just speaking directly to your question in regards to who's invited and who is it prioritizing. So it isn't open to all, but we do prioritize Tacoma Park residents. Many of the children who are involved are students of Tacoma Park Elementary, Piney Branch Elementary, Tacoma Park Middle. We also spent a great deal of time canvassing Tacoma Park businesses, asking for support and donations, and we did receive them from, and we also advertised greatly on Tacoma Radio. So it is an inclusive Tacoma Park event that we have strenuously worked to ensure that we include all of Tacoma Park and the community itself.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight to answer questions. Councilwoman Searcy.
So can't beat that, but but I do want to say that I fully support this event. You know, I think about it not just from the perspective of what the children are creating today, but what they may be able to create in the future. And I think it's critical that we're building home-growing entrepreneurs that might ultimately stay here and open businesses here. And so I see this as a longer tail investment into the future of the city. So fully support it.
Yes. Great. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. And I really appreciate very much you contacting the church. We try to keep great relationships with them, and they've been very understanding in the past of different things. So we very much appreciate that, and I really look forward to coming this year. So thank you, and let us know if there's other things we can do, and keep us informed so we can send out information about it as well. Thank you. All right, our next work session is on a discussion of a contract for an elevator retrofit.
Yes, so we're going to retrofit our existing old elevator. It's always amazing to me how expensive elevators are and fixing elevators. We did have 2 bids. The lower face price bid is actually a higher price when you add the things on that go into the whole elevator. Plus, it would make it a proprietary equipment system, which we prefer not to do. So the better price and service is from Elevator Control Service at a price of $196,715. This will come back to you next week, next Monday for approval.
Great. Any questions? Councilwoman DeBaller and Siemens, you guys are really into elevators tonight?
Yeah.
All right.
I have a, this is my question.
It's like almost 9 o'clock and we got to do trees.
I'm so sorry. Real quick, under environmental considerations, it says there's none, but yet you're talking about a sump pump and disposal costs. And so could you just take a moment and explain why we need a sump pump and what disposal costs?
So this, yeah, Braithwaite, do you want to speak to it? Sure. It's
Because the elevator goes down to the basement level, water condenses down to the basement, so it's just a sump to discharge the water that's groundwater that comes up just because we dug in the ground. Disposal is just the items that are being removed from the elevator storage
So it's not
case.
electrical disposal
Yeah.
or something? Okay, thank you.
My question's just as easy. What's the life expectancy of the elevators?
I think, I'd have to look in our ERR. I think we have 25 years before rehab, but I could be wrong on that, so I can take a look. We have it aged out in our equipment replacement reserve.
And which elevator are we talking about?
The one
The
directly
old one.
behind, the oldest one, not the new one. There are some ADA-related button lighting size issues that are non-compliant with that elevator, and it's just some age with the system.
Thank you.
Great. All right, seeing no other questions, then I'll come back to us for a vote next week. We have a discussion of purchase of replacement police vehicles, and I do know there were a number of questions on this one.
I can have the chief speak to a couple.
Be great.
Good evening. I know a few questions came up about energy-efficient vehicles within the police department. And we answered a lot of the questions, but a lot of the council members just wanted to answer them publicly. The main questions were regarding electric vehicles for our patrol vehicles. And the question was, have the manufacturers created an electric vehicle that now is pursuit rated and patrol rated? And the answer is no. There are several jurisdictions that are trying out electric vehicles, but what they've done essentially is they've taken an electric vehicle in Hyattsville, for example, and put lights and a siren on it. That's not a patrol or pursuit rated vehicle. There's several factors that go into a patrol and pursuit rated vehicle that include suspension, include collision rating, include prisoner transport, and multiple other pursuit rating, multiple other things that electric vehicles aren't there yet. But what we're doing is we're gravitating towards hybrid vehicles for our patrol vehicles. Ford has manufactured a hybrid patrol vehicle that we're confident can be used as a patrol vehicle. So we're going to be purchasing those hybrid vehicles for our patrol fleet. We also are looking at electric vehicles. We have electric vehicles right now for our neighborhood services section, and we're looking at electric vehicles for other capacities that don't involve patrol. We understand our role completely in energy efficiency, and we're going to do whatever we can. If there's an energy efficient electric vehicle that comes on the market, we absolutely are going to explore that. So with that, what we're going to be doing is replacing 2 of our vehicles with the new Ford hybrid vehicles.
Great. Any other follow-up questions for the chief?
Just want to say
Councilman Costa?
thank you for following up with the question answers here and via email. Thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
It's a confusing subject, so I'm glad we were able to clarify some things.
Great.
I just wanted to hear you say it out loud.
Did you?
Thank you.
Did it sound, was it better in an email or me saying it?
You say, always when you come
Okay.
and say it.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
We
Appreciate
appreciate you
it.
coming, and the Deputy Chief as well. Thank you.
And just a note that the total cost of the proposed purchase is $110,000. So those are things that will come to you next week.
Great. All right. Now we're on to trees. All right. Do we have our city attorney? All right. We're continuing our tree discussion. Tonight, we're focusing specifically on the ordinance. However, as we have been doing this work since the last spring, I think we've started really getting into this. We will continue working on tree canopy goals and strategies, as well as continue with the tree ordinance. As we've been talking about, particularly with the tree canopy, we're talking about a focus on no net loss, greater biodiversity, climate resiliency, focus on native species, and improved education outreach. As we've said, the ordinance and the canopy actions are interconnected, and we will continue working on them together. Tonight, we're going to do a deep dive into the first cut at the city attorney's line edits to the tree ordinance. And we will come back to our broader conversation on tree canopy goals and strategies in a work session in January. Specifically, just as a note to close the loop on one thing, the council has asked staff and the Tree Commission to review and revise the species replanting list to incorporate greater species diversity, place more emphasis on native species, and consider species with climate resiliency. So we've had a conversation with staff on just moving that forward as we're focusing on the ordinance. So that work is happening. Again, I just want to thank the Tree Commission and the Committee on the Environment for their work on this to date and ongoing. And in particular, I want to thank my colleagues who have really taken the lion's share of this work. Councilmember Kovar, Davala, and Kostick, and in particular, thank our Director of Public Works, Darrell Braithwaite, and our City Attorney. I'm going to walk us through the ordinance, the draft ordinance. I don't know if members of the public, somehow our agenda items that we usually put over here on the wall, kind of disappeared tonight. We don't know what happened, but if someone needs a copy, please let us know, and the city clerk is getting copies of it, but we do apologize for that delay. It's, I would say it was April Fool's, but it is not yet quite April Fool's, so. They were flyers that were removed, yes. As has been our practice in the past, when we do a work session on an ordinance like this, I'm going to take us through and walk through this. Please, I will stop at each section, and if someone would like to comment, make a change, please do so. Our urban forest manager has been on leave, so there are definitely sections of this that the city attorney has noted that we will need to wait for his input when he gets back. So I will note those sections when we get to them.
Could I make one quick interjection? Yeah. So I'm happy to just go through the way you described. Also, just in conversations with residents, I've heard about or been made aware of a few more areas within this that it might make sense to change. I'm going to hold off on going into the new ones now because we've got our hands full just with the existing ones, but I just want to sort of say this particular alignment doesn't stop us from going back and suggesting more.
Absolutely not. This is our first work
okay.
session.
Yep.
I would like not to have many work sessions in starting in January. Just as a reminder, we have our climate change plan to get through. We need to work on our elections ordinance and a number of other things. However, the reason we are doing this today is to basically do a first cut so that when we are on recess, each of us can talk to constituents, get greater feedback. So when we come back in January, hopefully we can finish this up in one, maybe two other work sessions and then vote on it. So that's the goal. But yes, that's the reason we're doing this today. And just as a reminder, the reason that we're doing the presentation on the climate change strategy on Monday is also so that over the recess, when we're not having weekly meetings, we have times to meet with residents and gather input so that when we come back in January, we can hit the ground running. Okay. So with that, the beginning of our tree ordinance starts with Chapter 12.04, General Provisions, and we have in this chapter definitions. The city attorney has included a new definition of ecosystem services, invasive species, and tree impact assessment. Are there any comments on this section that we want to bring up? Councilwoman Dabala.
Yeah. The definitions of ecosystem services, not the same one that the tree commission submitted. Curious as to the source of this one and why you think it's better.
Who's supposed to answer?
If you did it, then you should answer it.
Yes.
I was looking at Daryl because I thought maybe she had.
I actually didn't realize the tree commission had proposed the definition.
I'll send it back to you.
Okay.
The commission, I met with the commission last week and they had a lot of ideas, but not, I don't think, the agreement on what it should be.
Okay. And while I'm at it, on hazardous, we had discussed whether to put in the definition of hazardous a time frame. I note that it's not here, and we're not going to get agreement on that right this minute, but we did talk about whether we were going to see some statement about the hazardous tree being, 1 year, 3 years, whether it was going to be in the rating table or whether it was going to be in the definition. So I'm just flagging that for everybody.
Although that concept does occur
Later.
Later.
Yeah, which is, I'm just flagging it, that's all I'm doing.
Yeah, I would caution adding that to a hazard definition, because
Okay.
the hazard definition, particularly for hazardous trees, is very specific. And there's ISA and other organizations that work on trees that define hazard. Our definition is pretty close to what they use
Okay.
for hazard. We could tweak it a bit, but a tree that is going to survive 1 to 3 years is not considered a hazard. It's a declining trees. It's in decline, but a hazard is something very specific with a relation to failure of all or a portion of the tree. So it's a very specific definition.
Right, and you had at one point said that you wanted to see this, I thought it was the definition, maybe it was somewhere else, to include the concept of that it's the entire tree that cannot be corrected. Did you want that in the definition?
It's in there now, tree or tree part. You can correct a hazardous tree part. If it's a entire tree hazard, then the tree has to be removed. So it's in the definition
So
now.
you're okay, okay, thank you. And one last thing, why are we defining tree impact assessment? Excuse me, tree impact assessment, what was your thinking about adding that?
I forget if it was a request from, I believe it was from the council. If not from the council, it was from the tree commission.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question actually on the tree impact assessment definition. It says, is a service provided by the city to assist property owners in preventing unnecessary harm. I was curious why, if the word unnecessary, not that we need to nitpick or look at every word, but just sort of unnecessary harm. Is there a necessary harm? Yeah, is there a necessary harm?
I think yes, there is. It depends what they're proposing to do to their property. Everything, any kind of construction could have an impact on the trees. But we allow some to proceed.
Makes sense.
Okay, great.
And I had one question
Yeah.
about that. I just thought it would make more sense, and this is again into the wordsmithing, but I don't see tree impact assessment as a service provided by the city. It's a required thing. So I would say it's a process required by the city to help, to assist property owners in preventing that or something like that. I don't think most people see it as a service.
That was a recommendation of the tree commission, and they point out that it is valuable to have somebody, an arborist, come and give you information about what impact your project will have on your trees. It's probably worth more than the money that they paid the city for it. But I also understand why people do not view it as a service.
Okay. All right, any other comments on definitions? All right, I'm gonna, Councilmember Kovar, is your light on in
No,
preparation
that's-
for the next thing, or? All right, moving forward then, we have not, I don't think any other.
Can I
Yeah.
make a quick note? I
Yeah.
just noticed as I was going through it, in 1204.040, interface prohibited, I think we were changing he or she to they, and I noticed.
Oh, yeah.
If we could change that wording there. It says a person who prevents, delays, or interferes with the city manager while he or she.
I'm sorry, I missed that one.
So if we could just change that he or she to they.
Right, we're changing all he's or she's to they, citizen changes to resident, arborist goes to urban forest manager. Okay. That takes us then to page 5, I believe, and section 12.04.080, city manager to have decision-making authority for all trees on city property. Everybody good with being here?
I have a couple of things there.
Okay.
To me, it seemed logical just to have an additional language in that A, specifying that the city manager can delegate authorities contained in the ordinance. I think most people who read that, and certainly we don't anticipate that he or she or they, Suzanne Ludlow herself, is out there cutting down the trees or doing these things. But on the other hand, for people who are reading the ordinance, it would just make it easier, I think, to understand that literally the city manager isn't doing all these things, just as the city manager isn't doing lots of things. You know, when I worked at HUD, it said the secretary is going to do all these things. The secretary wasn't doing them. So I just think a sentence saying, unless there's a legal reason not to, to say that the city manager can delegate the authorities contained in the ordinance.
Well, I mean, we have in the general provisions chapter of the code, it says it defines city manager
Right.
to include city manager's designee. We could add a definition of city manager in this chapter as well.
I think it would be helpful just because this is one that residents read probably in a way that they don't read a lot of our other statutes and wouldn't have, I assumed that was in our general code somewhere, but I just think it'd be helpful to have, so.
Okay.
I would also just point out in this section, it's really specific to
Oh, I'm
authority for
sorry.
trees on city property. So in that case, I think you really would want that clearly to be the city manager's decision entirely, and not a designee.
Right.
You wouldn't want a designee deciding what's happening for trees on city
But
property.
is the city
So-
manager just signing off on your recommendations on trees and public property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, in other parts, I think it makes sense to
right.
define the designee. I just think in that specific one, on a staff level, I want the urban forest manager to go to the city manager, like we do with sign requests. Suzie has the ultimate decision. We make a recommendation, but it's her call.
And the only other thing in that paragraph A, I would say, is at the end, it says, undertake all reasonable tree protection measures when making decisions regarding trees on city property, as is required of private persons under this chapter. I don't think that it's exactly the same, right?
Well, yeah, and clearly.
Because we don't have the same appeal procedures.
I mean,
and all. So I think,
private persons don't make decisions about
Right,
city trees.
right.
So maybe there's just some slight wording change.
I have a couple of word suggestions there that I can send it. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well,
were you done?
it's just saying that the city manager is supposed to apply the same criteria. I mean, but we could also remove that, the last portion. I think the tree
Yeah,
commission recommended that is, I just think to try to convey that as much as possible that we are
I mean, the 9
requiring
or
the
10
same
criteria
substance.
are the same, that's fine, but other procedures are not the same, definitively not the
Well,
same.
I think there's a word fix for that.
Right, that's all.
Okay.
All right, we'll look at a word fix for that. All right.
I have one question on D.
Mm-hmm.
No, wait, C, sorry. The city must replace the tree in accordance with 1212-100, which is the tree replacement requirements. Is that really what we mean? Pardon?
It is what we do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else in this section? 12.04080. All right, then we will move on. I'm moving now to chapter 12.08, prohibitions on maintaining undesirable vegetation. All right. Page 7, that was the next, chapter 12.08, prohibitions on maintaining undesirable vegetation. Here's where we added under 12.08010, infected or infested woody vegetation on private property, that the city manager may promulgate regulations requiring certification of proper disposal of infested trees to prevent spread of infestation. That came up at our meeting regarding the oaks. Any other changes or suggestions in this section?
Two things.
Mm-hmm.
On 040B, noxious growths. Are we up to that?
Yes, we can be. Go ahead.
This lists specific plants. Do we mean invasive vines generally? And if so, should we say so? Based on our conversation about invasives in the past. So that's just a question that we can think about.
Yeah, I think it would be better to have either list more specific ones or just have a general term, if it's a term that's understood. Invasive.
Is it, Daryl, is that, I guess I don't know that these are I mean, are these actually invasive,
Well,
or
that's
do
what
they
I'm
have,
asking.
there may be things that have other bad qualities to them?
These are invasive, bamboo, kudzu, multiflora
Right.
rose, wisteria, they're all very invasive plants. I think it's helpful to have them identified because a lot of people know the name, whereas if you just say an invasive
Invasive
plant, they may not
I
know.
guess the question is, I heard from
Good.
some residents who had several more to suggest, so
Mhm.
I wonder whether it should say
Such as.
invasive such as, and then you've got
Sure.
those.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Because we do have other vines or vegetation. I guess you also could put it in a regulation
Right.
that the city manager designates what's considered invasive, and that list could be, amended, added to over time as needed.
Great. All right.
I also note on 070, when you talked with the tree commission in their written comments, they flagged that section where they wanted to review it for sufficient process and consistency with other city regulations. Did they bring that up this last time round?
No, we didn't discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to make sure I understand the point raised about the regulations requiring the certification. So is
Where are you, sorry?
I guess I'm at 1208B. Am I looking at an old version?
No, wait, did you go back up?
I went back up.
1208-010.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, and the invasive, the
1208-010B.
disposal of infested trees?
Yeah.
All right, so when we had the Oaks thing, this came from it, so the, I think it was Keith Pritchett or somebody talked about, how the city, depending on the infestation, the city manager may tell, tree removal companies and, private homeowners that if they have, like, say, the beetle borer, then they have to spray paint B and have the wood disposed of in a certain way. So that would cover those circumstances. We're making sure that the city manager has that authority.
Authority to do that,
Yeah.
but not necessarily that we would have to establish a more robust like certification process. In addition to identifying, contacting the tree services, having them then come back and certify to us that what they've done is proper. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. I
Yeah.
wasn't at the event,
Yeah.
so I'm just trying to make sure I understand the level of effort that would be included in something
I mean,
like this.
I guess I would prefer to leave it open, but I
Yeah.
think that, especially if it's a particularly, bad type of infestation, there may be times when we want to basically have some attestation that it was taken to a landfill or was ground up or whatever is the appropriate way to dispose of the wood that's not giving it to their neighbor for,
Yeah.
Right,
and
right,
sharing,
right.
sharing that.
But then, how would we know? So like, we're talking about the white oaks right now. If we're not talking about trees that are on public property, then you would actually have to.
So if somebody had a waiver to take down a tree because it was dead because of that, then that would be part of the
Then that
waiver.
would be
That's
what was
already
part of
Yeah,
it.
we'd
That's
have
what
the
I'm trying to figure
language on it, just like now you get a piece of paper that you're supposed to post in your window for 7 days. That paperwork that we send to people could say, have your tree company notify us when it's removed and what they did with it, or, whatever the requirement is.
Got it. Thank you.
Can I ask one question about that, too? So I could imagine in the future, and this relates to what Mr. Silverman said, that the state or the county might have guidelines on this. Can we just assume that if there were, that would be taken into account on something like this? We don't need to specify that here, that you
Right,
would-
if it gets to that level, it's gonna be the Department of Ag that'll set those rules, and we'll be required to follow them. So we'll just already have a method in place for how we're communicating.
Okay.
Otherwise, for jurisdictions that don't have a tree permit process like us, they're not oversee the tree company. So it would be almost like our Safe Grow, where you had to communicate directly with the tree
Okay.
companies themselves for that.
Okay.
Great. Councilman Costick?
Yeah, I have just an item to flag for someone to look at in 1208025, vegetation not to obscure intersection. I think this is really important because we do have places where it's really dangerous at an intersection, but it says that vegetation taller than 3 feet above a street surface except an urban forest tree is not permitted within 20 feet of the corner. That seems like a lot to me. And I also wonder how we could potentially get from having a small tree to an urban forest tree if we prevent trees in that location. So if that may be beyond our current discussion, but I think as we're looking at the code, if we can just take a look and make sure that is the appropriate amount of feet and the appropriate size.
Okay. All right, moving on to chapter 12.12, urban forest. The first paragraph here is legislative findings and purpose, and I'm going to suggest, because I've received some comments on this, that we not try and wordsmith this tonight, but that we share feedback amongst ourselves and to the city attorney, and work on that kind of wording and come back to it at a later work session, because I think we could spend all night working on the words here. But I do appreciate that we're moving towards stewardship of our urban forest as a community effort, and it's going in that direction and reflects the conversations we have to date. So putting a pin in that one that we will come back to. I'm moving down now onto section 12.12030, tree impact assessment required. And in this section, this is one of the places that we've discussed moving away from talking about activity in the critical root zone to talking about activity 50 feet, within 50 feet of an urban forest tree, to make that clearer to residents, because nobody really knows what a critical root zone is. In addition, in this section, we also changed the percentage for pruning trees from 5% to 10%. That'll look good to people? Councilwoman Costick.
I have a couple of items. First of all, in number 2A2, where there's the edits regarding 50 feet of an urban forestry, it seems to me to currently read that there's only an issue with compacting the soil, destroying the roots, and I just want to make sure that it doesn't also preclude literally destroying a root directly, not just compacting the soil.
Yeah, I noticed
So
that
like
too.
digging.
Yeah, or driving a truck directly on a route that's exposed and damaging it. I think right now with the edits, it says activity within 50 feet of an urban forest tree that may destroy, or maybe
Yeah,
it's may
that's
destroy or
crossed
may compact the soil, thereby destroying the roots. So not just compact, but may destroy or or may damage or compact the soil. I don't know. You can figure out the
Okay.
exact wording, but I think right now it's only focusing on compacting the soil.
Okay, I mean, so I'll take a look at it. Like, one is land disturbing activities, so that would get to like digging type damage. But yeah, I'll see if I can plug any holes in that.
All right, and then my notes are not showing up right on my computer, so I'm trying to look at them on my phone. It's really hard to read them. But if looking down at B here, regarding emergency basis, I would like to look into better defining what an emergency is. As far as I can tell, there's nothing in the code that really defines what an emergency is and who gets to decide what an emergency is. So I'd like to see if there's a way to better define that, and also to provide opportunities where there might be an emergency at the beginning, but as things go on, the initial emergencies maybe short up, and then there's continued work over several weeks, let's say, that may not be an emergency. I'd like to make sure we can still, in those cases, ask for tree protection requirements.
You have a particular incident in mind? No.
I do.
I know.
I do.
I do too.
Yeah, gee, we're thinking the same
Yeah.
one.
And then regarding skipping the tree impact assessment, I don't know if I'm not remembering right, but I thought when we talked about this before, we were told that you could actually currently skip the tree impact assessment. Is that correct? Yeah?
And along those lines, I thought what we discussed was not skipping it, but was combining it. So do the tree impact assessment at the same time, not skip the process of making the assessment, but do it when if you know you're going to the second step, to combine them, not eliminate. So that was my comment on that section, is this reads as if it's eliminating it.
Yeah,
which
I had a
which
problem with
wasn't-
E.
Which wasn't what
Yeah.
I thought we were doing.
The way E is worded, I had the same question.
My
So-
recollection is the tree commission feels really strongly that the tree impact assessment process should be followed, and we should be more absolute about it rather than let people skip it if
Yes.
they want it. But I think it's a policy issue on your part based on, what you're hearing. The risk someone runs into is if they don't do a tree impact assessment and go right to the tree protection plan, they may have it wrong, and it may
Right.
delay their process. So we're basically just trying to help them help themselves get through the process.
Yeah, and I think it was my sense, my recollection from the council discussion on the policy issue is that we wanted to make sure that we kept the tree impact assessment part. And so I think it's just a question of how, I think it's E, if that's, that I was having the problem with, because it says failure to obtain a tree impact assessment or a tree protection plan permit. It makes it sound like you have a choice. And so I think we just need to clean up the language. We want the tree impact assessment step. That still is a required step. And then you go to the tree protection plan permit.
Okay.
That make sense?
So again, I thought on C, that following the tree impact assessment, the urban forest manager will advise the person requesting whether they need to do the tree protection plan. I thought we were looking at an option where you could do them both and not take the time that asking the urban forest manager to review the tree impact assessment, and then it takes him a couple weeks or however long it takes, and then he says yes, and everybody knew he was going to say yes, you have to do the tree protection plan. I thought we were trying to combine those, allow folks to combine those when possible, when it was appropriate.
I mean, it's a recommendation of staff and myself and the tree commission that they not be combined, because what happens if people skip the tree impact assessment, they go down a path that they may regret, and it ends up taking more time. So the kind of getting the arborist involved or the urban forest manager involved at the earliest possible point and explaining how a project could impact a tree, how it could be adjusted to reduce the impact is very valuable. Otherwise, they may invest time and money in design and planning and a tree protection plan that's going to be rejected.
I guess I'm not convinced yet, but we don't have to
Well, I think
debate
one of
this
it
right
was,
now.
and maybe Ms. Braith, what you wanted, is what's in the ordinance, and then
What's in the process.
what's in the
yeah.
process.
Sure, well,
and-
and I was going to say that the tree impact assessment is really more an opportunity for the urban forest manager to provide information to the applicant,
Right.
whereas the tree protection plan is really the applicant providing their measures they're going to implement to the city for approval. So it really is a different process. You can't really combine
Combine
them. They are sequential. Anyway.
So the question I have is how, for example, if you have an experienced contractor versus somebody doing the work themselves or some pretty simple project where it may be somebody who works with the city regularly and has a pretty good understanding of how this works. Do they really need the tree impact assessment? Do they get anything from that they couldn't get from just going to the tree protection plan?
Probably not for someone who's well-versed or has a, landscape architect or tree background or has done multiple projects and could, basically craft the tree protection plan. So there's probably not a whole lot in it for them. However, the process for a tree impact assessment, providing you provide a complete application, is not very time-intensive at all. There isn't any posting requirement, there's no notice requirement. It's basically, we get the application, we do a site visit, we send them a letter. So it's a pretty quick process.
And how long does that take typically?
Well, over the past month, we've got everything out within 2 or 3 days of
Okay.
receipt of the application.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, it can't always be that way. And again, if someone submits a tree impact assessment that doesn't have a drawing or is, difficult to understand, or they ask for to meet on site and we have to work out time and dates for the arborist and the person to be present, that may add some time. But again, in those cases where people really know the process, know the drill, they can submit what they need to submit. We can turn it around pretty quickly. And then they're off to the next step. And nothing's stopping them from starting their tree protection plan application almost simultaneously. If they know it's going to be required, they could be working that out, at the same time. So it doesn't have to slow them down.
And if you,
I'm sorry, I was going to say, we're putting all this, now we're moving this electronically, right?
Our tree removal process is the first
Right.
application to get electronified. This should be a breeze versus that, so.
Sorry.
And right now, it is 2 steps, or right now, you can jump ahead to the tree protection plan?
We will accept a tree protection plan submitted with a $100 payment. Yeah.
Without a
Tree
having
impact
gone through the-
assessment.
And does this change it so that that's not possible anymore?
Right.
It kind of makes it clear that they need to follow the
Right. And there's been a
steps.
lot of confusion around it. So that was
Right.
one of our conversations, was to clearly, and that's
Clarify
why
one way or the other.
we,
Yeah.
the city attorney added tree impact assessment required. Yeah,
But with
in
the
heading.
or in there in E, it still leaves it up in the air. That's the.
Right, that's the
what your
one we gotta
point is.
change,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, my point, I could take it that, my point there was that if you get a tree impact assessment, it doesn't mean you can automatically proceed to do the work.
Right.
You may also need a tree protection plan.
Yeah. I think it's just the or. And given this is an area of confusion right now, yeah. Councilman Costick, sorry, we kept cutting you off.
Councilmember Deval actually asked my question, so I'm good on that one.
Awesome.
I do have one other item, if nobody has anything else on that, and it was just D of that section regarding the fees. Is it
Yeah.
possible to just move fees into admin regs so we can change those as they may need to be changed in the future without having to go through a whole process?
We strongly encourage that, particularly if we have an opportunity to have a system where periodically we're able to increase them.
Yeah.
Great idea. All right, so then We are just been joined by the chair of our tree commission. We're just going through. We're on section 12.12040, tree protection plan permit required. And there were some things added here.
I have a comment about what's on page 11 of the
Yeah.
draft, which is the authority to require the applicant to hire an arborist to work on the tree protection plan. And I think, to me, it's fine to be able to require that in a big commercial project or a big development. And I can imagine in many cases it would make sense to do it. I worry that it would just end up becoming the default that everybody gets asked to do that all the time. And I can certainly imagine times when it could easily be done without the arborist, without an arborist being hired. So I'd lean toward if there's a way to, and however we would define kind of smaller or simpler projects that aren't that complex, somehow signaling that he or they should not ask for it.
Let me explain where that's coming from. That's based on the urban forest manager's experience that if he's dealing with somebody who doesn't have an expert helping them on a big or complicated project, that he just goes back and forth and around with them. And I did try to write it so it can be required, when it's a big project or a complex issue. I mean, it's not. I don't think there's any intent to always require it. It's just having the ability to do that in appropriate
Well, I mean, I guess I would just say
circumstances.
complex, I would say unusually complex or something like that, because they're all pretty complex, to somebody who's not familiar with it. I don't know, again, I don't want to get into adverbs and so on right now tonight, but it seems a little more open-ended than I'd be comfortable with there. That's all I would say.
We can also look to see if it's easier to write it in the reverse that identifies what's a simple situation. I'm not sure which is easier to define with the criteria.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I have a couple of questions. One is on A, number 2. And there were a couple other places where the council talked about what is significant. Did we want to try to, particularly with the change from critical root zone to 50 feet, did we want to try to put something around significant? And I don't remember where we came out on that.
I thought we said no because it was too hard.
We might have said no because it was too hard,
I-
but
that's what I thought, yeah.
I'm just raising it.
That's what I had in my notes when I was going through this. But if other people had something else, I thought we were going to leave it at the within 50 feet because that would be understandable. to
So for that,
folks.
would you just take out the phrase that may destroy a significant portion because it's implied with the 50
No, I
feet?
was just
No, I would
looking
keep it in. I
significant.
think.
Yeah, keep it in.
But Councilwoman DeBala wanted to define what do we mean by significant.
Significant. I've heard 20 or 30%. So
Yeah.
if there was a real interest in trying to define it a little better, we can talk to the trained professionals and see. A lot of it depends on how much of the tree root system is already impacted by
Yeah.
driveways, buildings, other trees. So sometimes getting into that percentage thing is kind of playing a game because, the tree roots are already only growing on 40% of a lot, and 20% of that is horrible. But if you have a lot where 100% of the tree roots are fine and you take 20% away, it's much less impactful. So a lot of it depends on the site.
Right, and the other thing to think about is, unlike the tree impact assessment requirement, which is kind of outward facing and people need to be able to read that and know when to get the assessment, this is for the urban forest manager during the tree impact assessment to decide whether a tree protection plan is required.
So
So-
are you okay with that, Councilwoman DeBala, leaving it?
think it was also in the tree impact assessment, that's, I'm just looking back to see. I will double check.
Okay.
Maybe that's the place to be a little more specific.
All right. Moving,
Another,
yeah.
if I
oh,
can
sorry.
go to B as well, which Councilmember Kovar had asked about. Why was the decision made regarding a certified arborist or licensed landscape architect to be the person to complete it? Does the landscape architect have the capacity to complete a tree protection plan?
No, if that's still in there, that should come out.
Okay.
The tree commission advised me that
Okay.
they do not have that expertise.
Great, thank you.
Great. Moving to the next section, 12.12050, tree removal permit required. There's a lot taken out of this, or no, it's the section, the next section. Right, it's moved somewhere else. And then the next section, 12.12060. So I'm gonna move us.
Wait.
No, okay.
12.12060 moved, right?
No, that,
It's been a,
I
yeah,
deleted
yeah.
that was the section on,
Waivers,
on the
waiver
waivers,
application.
yeah.
Yeah. And the note on page 13. We had talked about if a person wishes to remove a tree for any purpose, must file a tree removal permit application. If the tree is dead or hazardous, a tree removal permit will issue with no right for others to appeal the granting of the permit with no replacement requirement. So that's why we removed all that.
Right.
So that's the new waiver.
Yeah.
That's what was a waiver before, is now that.
Right. Okay, so then I'm moving us to 12.12070, permit applications. Any comments there? And then we have the next section, 12.12080, permit approval.
I would appreciate a walk, just if I've got this right. So A is
Are you
tree.
in permit, I just want to make sure you're in permit approval?
Yeah, so
Okay.
on 080, A is tree removal permits subject to appeal. B is tree removal permits not subject to appeal. C is tree protection plans. And there is no D, tree protection plans not subject to appeal. So, and I think that was there already. Why are we, if we've got a whole section on appeals, why are we distinguishing here between those that get an appeal and those that don't?
I mean, the section on appeals is more about the process of the appeal.
And this is about the existence of the appeal, the right of appeal. Is that
Right,
what you're telling me?
the decision, the preliminary decision.
Okay, thanks.
I have a related question. Under, let's see, what is this, C3, tree protection plans? That just seemed like an odd location for that information because it doesn't seem to relate to an appeal unless I'm missing something. It seems more related to the tree protection plans content, which I think was above. Just see if you can take a look at that.
Well, the above was talking about when a tree protection plan is required. And
Oh, this is
and this is about the decision on the tree protection plan
Okay.
permit application.
Okay.
So we talked about a couple of different types of appeal, and there were several we wanted to retain, and there was one that we wanted to eliminate, and I'm just not sure whether that goes here or that goes somewhere else on the different types of appeals.
Which,
So we
what
were-
type of appeal are you?
I think you're talking about
thinking of?
page 16, the comment on page 16, is that?
Right, so we haven't gotten to page 16 yet, so
I had a couple of things on
Is-
15, so before we get there.
is this consistent with the appeal section? So I guess we'll find out when we get there.
It seems as if we're removing the appeal process for the tree protection plan. Is that what this is proposing to do? We've eliminated that as a appealable item.
I think this is confusing titles.
Maybe
Because
that's
if you
why I'm
go
having
under, I'm not the expert here, but under the 12-12-080 permit approval, this is tree removal permit approval for those that are subject to appeal? Would that clarify the situation? Because this is the criteria for approval. It's not specifying how to appeal them.
Right.
And why are they?
So maybe one is, the approval, the terms for approval for those subject to appeal, and then the terms for approval for those not subject to appeal. Is that what the two A and B are?
I mean, there are, depending on the reason for the approval, it may or may not be subject to appeal, and it's broken down in those categories.
Yeah, so I think it's the title that you think you're reading about appeals, but it's more
Not.
about the criteria for approvals.
Or the process.
Or the process.
That you have 2
Right.
days to post and then certain days, yeah. So
Because
it's
that's
really
what
the
this,
process.
right, because this chapter is permit approval.
Right.
Okay, I can change the.
Does that help, Councilwoman
The
Devala?
titles of the subsections.
Maybe.
And then maybe
Yeah, I think
we
that's-
start with the approval, or the approval or notification process, and then the appeal as maybe a new B for each of those.
Yeah, okay, so this needs a little.
And then we need to
Straighten out.
determine whether or not we're eliminating the ability to appeal a tree protection plan, because currently, as this is now drafted, that's gone.
So before we go to that, just
And that's
on,
page, I just want to make sure you're talking about page 16.
yeah, so
Okay,
if we can
good.
just go
Number
back to
C,
page
yeah.
15 for a moment, under B, which is right in the middle there of page 15, there were several points there. So on B1, first of all, and I don't know if this would potentially go in the definition section, but it was pointed out to me recently, and this gets back to this undesirable versus invasive that I thought we had kind of put to bed, but that there are non-invasive or even native plants, silver maple was mentioned to me, which may be undesirable because they don't do well and they fall down a lot. And so I just wonder whether we still need to keep 3 categories, invasive, native, and undesirable, which might not technically be invasive. It's not going to spread, but we don't really want to be planting a lot of them because they may fall down easily. And I am certainly not an expert on which ones that would be, but I was persuaded that that was something we should at least consider.
Well, and then is that in terms of not planting more, or in having different rules or more lenient rules for taking them out?
Well,
Yeah,
that's
wouldn't
a-
that go to the chart?
It might,
Yeah,
it
because
I think
might,
that goes
it
in the
might go
chart
more
later.
for, it might go more for replaying, but all I'm saying is we've struck the concept of undesirability from this, I think, and maybe we
Oh,
need to put it back.
but I wasn't thinking of the replanting chart. I was thinking also the,
Well, if it's a big, full tree that
Category-
has a
the
lot of climate
criteria.
change benefit, I'm not sure you have to treat it any differently than another one. You just don't want to have too many of them in the future if they're going to keep
Right.
falling down. I only mention it because it pops up here. This
Right,
is,
if I could explain, I think the tree commission and the council both kind of decided to change from undesirable to invasive, but when I met with them last week, they think we do need to take a closer look at
Okay,
that.
and I thought that was fine before until I got this other information, so that's all. So
Yeah,
just
and
move, sorry.
We could, if we're only going to have one, it would be undesirable and, you know, invasive will be examples of that. But I think, you know, and there are different considerations. There's replacement requirements, there's removal. So we just generally need to take a closer look and make sure we use the right terminology and it works.
So then just on number 3 in the same section, B3 on page 15, and it talks about removing dead or hazardous trees. And so, and I'm sorry if I don't quite have this right, but I know somewhere in here we talk about a tree that is in decline or not expected to live beyond a certain point.
Yeah, right above it, life expectancy less than 3 years, number 2.
Right, but so, I thought in 2, we had talked, when we spoke the other day, about something about active decline as opposed to just the life expectancy, so that would give us a little bit more of an understanding. But, can you just remind, so do we have an appeal for the hazard determination, or is that something we said we weren't going to do? I know we talked about that a lot, but.
I mean, I think staff and the commission and myself all recommend strongly against that because really what that is that's an appeal. People to appeal that because they don't want to pay the replacement cost. Right now, if you get a waiver, you don't have to replace the tree. So I think if somebody could save 500,000, whatever the tree replacement cost is, it's worth a evening before the tree commission, and we'd be doing hearings 3 nights a week.
All right,
But they're still allowed to take down a tree, presumably if it's close enough to even consider it a waiver. It's in a condition that justifies removal. It's just that there's a replacement cost.
And then in number 4 here, it says impacting a building other than an outbuilding, and that sort of impacting seems like a very vague term to me, and I'm not sure I'm right about that or what a better term would be, but impacting.
Significantly?
Or negatively, or, I mean, impacting could be.
Well, in some ways, we have a really tight definition now, and I think the message we got was you wanted a little bit broader. Like if it's banging on the gutter or hitting your, roof trusses, in the past, we probably would have seen it as a pretty high replacement removal candidate. So this is actually loosening that piece up, and by using that word impacting, kind of give it more room to be interpreted that way. If you start adding more specific language to it, you're going to narrow that back down again. So it just depends on where you want to go with it.
So you think this would lead to a slightly more flexible?
Yeah.
Okay.
So help me out.
It could be touching. That's, I mean, that's the concept. That's more clear.
So help me out here. This section B is we don't have 2 separate processes for a waiver and a removal permit, but we have some removal permits that if they were on the tree rating chart, they'd score 0. And we're just saying, these are the ones, these are the types of trees.
That wouldn't be subject to appeal.
That wouldn't be subject to appeal
Right.
and wouldn't be subject to replacement, or just wouldn't be subject to appeal?
Wouldn't be subject to replanting, I would assume.
Well.
But that's not what this
But that's not
section
what
is
this
about.
is, and that's why I'm confused. So if this is the ones that you can't appeal, so if you have something that has to come out.
Right.
And has to come out it's an invasive species, I'm not sure about that. It has to come out if it's a life expectancy of less than 3 years. It has to come out if it's a hazardous tree that cannot be, and the hazard can only be limited by removing the tree. That one makes sense. It's a hazard if it directly impacts, touches, I think we might use a different verb there, a building.
Right. So
Okay,
right
so
now,
3
it's
and
a
4 ma-
definition for non-appeals. Because we don't have changes to the criterion yet for replanting, we don't have the answer to that question.
Okay, so right
But-
now
but
this is
to
only
answer
about
what-
not appealing.
Right.
These aren't all necessarily cases where a tree has to come out. It's just where we're not so worried about the tree coming out, so we're not
Appealing.
allowing an appeal of the granting of the.
And my interpretation is then we would also reduce the replanting requirements on these.
So we're not into replanting yet. This is just whether or not you can appeal.
I guess I want to hold on signing off on this till we see what the other stuff looks
Right.
like, and we're not going to have all of that today.
Right.
But this gives us,
Mhm.
in pretty clear language, something a little broader than what we had, gives us something to think about. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to turn the page.
I have
No,
one
sorry.
more point, but I think it might be better to discuss later rather than here. But that's the idea of the life expectancy of 3 years, and how that can be determined, how easy it is to determine that, and if that is sort of general, how that number has been arrived at.
I think it's just been a general discussion among the tree commission and the arborist in the past. It will be a difficult number. I think what we've seen this year, trees that look perfectly healthy died in an appearance of 2 weeks. So someone that saw that tree in April would have said, oh, no, it's not three years to decline. They would have rated it differently. So it's a bit of a moving target with this summer's experience. In general, a tree that, in the past, a tree that has 3 years is one that you can see obviously decline, and it's aged. It's aged out. The canopy is suffering. The root system is, you know that tree is going to be declining. It's in the downward trend.
But I think specifying active decline in addition to the 3 years, sends that signal that, that's what we're looking at, not just, hey, come on, this tree might not survive. It's got to really be showing that.
What if, this is just a brainstorm, I don't know if this will work, and it might depend on how the chart is modified, but what if it weren't based on a life expectancy specified here, but it were based on a rating on the chart?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of de facto what happens now when we use the chart for replanting. It really does identify the waivers versus the preliminary approvals, so.
So maybe we can put a pin in this to come back to after
Yeah.
the chart.
Yeah. All right, now I'm turning the page. And so the issue on page 16 is eliminating the right of neighbors to appeal the granting of a tree protection plan permits. And we've discussed this before. And the recommendation is to eliminate the right to appeal approval of a tree protection plan. People okay with that? All right.
I'd like to comment on it. It strikes me that there could be a situation where the abutting neighbor, if it's a shared tree or a shared root system, would have a real stake in it as opposed to just because he lives next door, or because they live next door, pardon me, not wanting some activity to happen. And so I don't think that a person who really has an actual tree-oriented stake in it should just be denied the opportunity to speak out. But I don't think it should just be by virtue of living next door, you get to do it. Does that make any sense? Like, I might live next door to someone who's doing it, but the tree protection plan's on the other side of the guy's yard, so why should I have anything to say about it? But if it was shared trees, why wouldn't I have a right to speak up?
We could use that same criteria as if the abutting tree is within 50 feet of the limited disturbance of the proposed activity.
But if we're going to have it, then I think 10 days is too short. I mean, I think 15 days seems reasonable to me.
My perspective is that it seems like the tree protection plan should be thorough and take everything into consideration regardless of, I mean, it doesn't seem like you would have a situation where a neighbor would ask for something that shouldn't have already been considered in the tree protection plan.
Yeah, that's kind of where.
Well, are they consulted, though?
No, they're not consulted, and by and large, that's the case. I mean, if we're doing our job, we've already taken their situation into consideration. However, just this month, we dealt with a neighbor a request for an appeal of a tree protection plan, and their points were very valid, and the plan was changed as a result, so they withdrew their appeal. So we have, just experienced a process where, some changes were made.
Mm-hmm. All right, so maybe changing this to not completely eliminating it, but as Ms. Braithwaite said, define it better. So it's not just any neighbor can appeal a tree protection plan, but it has to be within 50 feet or some parameters like that, and give it the 2 weeks to 15 days rather than the 10 days. Does that sound appropriate? And we can look at that again.
So the one other question I had on TPPs is, I've heard from people, and maybe this is purely anecdotal, and I would be interested in what you would have to say, Darryl. The TPP is agreed to, and the work starts, and then something had been missed, so it's added to, but it can be revised more than once and be revised multiple times. And I think that can be a frustrating source of delay for the applicant. And, there may be times that where they don't agree that it has to be done, and I suppose that gets into a whole separate process. But I noticed in here that it said you didn't even have to give the applicant a written explanation for what needed to be fixed with the TPP if it was rejected. And so all those things together strike me that at a minimum there ought to be a written requirement, because we've talked also more about when the permit is rejected, having it be written, and I just think information should be part of this. So
I fully agree. I think anytime we deny a permit, we should very specifically state why we're denying it, whether it's a removal or a tree protection plan.
I thought there was something that said they didn't have to give a written explanation.
No, I think it added language in now that we have to provide written, both for tree protection
when
plan.
reasonably feasible, the city manager will advise the applicant in writing of additional tree protection measures necessary. So they don't have to.
No, well, I'm comfortable with changing the language to say we have to, because they'll have a reason why they've denied it.
Right.
And it'll be a pretty strong reason if they're denying it versus continuing to work with the applicant to make it work. On the matter of a tree protection plan changing over the course of time, I agree that shouldn't happen. I don't know the specific cases where that may have come up. We have had cases where during construction something changes, like, oh, we just found out we have to upsize our water line, and it happens to go right through, so we have had cases where a plan was approved, but something changes, based on structural engineering or some other thing happens, or they've changed the plan. And so those revisions happen, but it's mostly applicant-driven. They want to change something that they're doing. And so we, advocate for them to get in touch with us rather than not. And there have been times where we've gone out and issued a stop work on cases like that because something else has happened. They didn't tell us, and they didn't revise it, and they're doing something that's going to impact a tree.
But you don't think the reverse is too common, where the UFM says do this and they do that, and then they come out and take a look and say
it should not happen. I mean, it should be a final process. When we send a permit, it should be very clear about the requirements. We do have a requirement for the applicant to notify us when they've installed the tree protection measures, and we go out and do a site inspection. So that could be a point at which something comes up that wasn't known before. So I guess that could be a point where a change was requested or made.
Okay.
But usually it would be based on new information or a new condition. And it would certainly be my hope that that would be the reason.
Okay.
So a couple of questions then. Do you need language saying if there's a change in the plan, then there can be a change in the tree protection plan? Or if there is a change in the applicant's
plan they need to come back to, or is that already in here?
I don't think we have that as a canned language in the permit itself, but it may be something that we should add.
So that's a
Just to
thought.
remind folks if things change during the course of
The
construction.
the second question is this so it says here, if the manager rejects a proposed protection plan, they'll advise the applicant in writing, et cetera, et cetera. Is this also the place where we say that the urban forest manager will identify the measures and explain why they're the ones he or she, they picked? Is this the place for that? Or
Which
is that-
section were you
I'm
referencing?
in C, at the end of the list in 3, there's a paragraph. I'm looking at that paragraph.
Which number?
Page 16?
I don't have page numbers, page 16.
Yeah, no, but like 12 something, 12,
Sorry.
We're still in 12.12080.
080, and then
And under
C.
C.
So it's tree protection plan permit approval?
Yeah, so
Okay.
approve the protection plans. The plans may include these elements. The city manager will approve protection plans that prescribe all the measures needed to protect the tree. The city manager if the city manager rejects a proposal, they have to explain why. And is this the place where you say, explain the measures that are required?
Yeah.
Or is that some other place
Oh,
already?
It's there now.
It's there now.
Yeah, necessary for approval of plan, explain why such measures are necessary. And
I'm not
I think
seeing
we
that.
could,
Maybe I'm just, tell me where you are.
it's right above number 4. Are we looking at the wrong paragraph?
That's if
That's
you're
right.
rejected.
Right.
Isn't that what we're talking about, if you're rejected?
I mean,
Let's
if you're
say
accepted.
that- and it says the city manager will advise the
All right, so that's a
applicant
wording thing, and we'll.
I mean,
necess-
if-
of the
if,
measures necessary for approval.
Right, and that's listed out in the permit, the plan that they submit has all the items that they're gonna do with definitions, and they've checked boxes, and have a site plan that marks it all out, so they know what they're
Right, and we were
doing.
just thinking before, take out when reasonably feasible.
Yeah.
That was Councilmember Kovar.
And that
'Cause
was
we-
for the rejection.
Right, that's all about the rejection, that sentence.
So what are you talking about, sorry?
There had-
Councilmember Devala, it says if the city manager rejects the proposed tree protection plan, they will advise the applicant of the
Right.
measures they need.
Right, and if the protection plan is approved,
They already
okay, I see what you,
they already
it's
have the
already in
measures
there,
they
never
need.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm sorry to drag this out.
Okay.
But I do not understand, I do not remember the sentence before that, where we're adding factors that in each of the factors is kind of general. Ken, what was your thinking in adding those factors, giving due consideration to these factors? I just don't remember talking about it, and the council didn't ask for it, so what's the thinking there?
It's just giving people a better idea of what the urban forest manager considers when deciding whether a protection plan, includes all reasonable measures. It's just trying to be more, to provide more information to residents.
Did you not like it?
I didn't, but we don't have to debate it. I wanted to start with why it was added.
I think we did discuss adding something about the consideration of the cost of the tree protection measures.
Right, okay.
So maybe we can just take a look at the wording.
Maybe that's the one we want. Okay.
Maybe we can look at the wording, because I actually do like, I'm not wedded to this language, but giving people some idea, because the thing, again, I keep coming back to what are the overarching things that we hear so that we don't get lost in the detail, is that people feel like it's very subjective, they don't understand it, it's confusing, it seems like this is the feedback at the whim of whomever. And so I think the more we can show that there is some rhyme to this reason, the better it is. So
Okay,
this may not be the exact language, but I
Yeah.
like the idea of explaining more what goes into that.
Okay, I thought the language was pretty vague and didn't help me any, but I get the basic idea, and I think the idea is a good one, so it's a wording thing that we can work on.
I mean, the problem is there's so many variables that it's
Right.
not possible to put it all into words.
Yeah.
And if you're missing one, yeah.
We could say a ranger or something like that, yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna move, all right, so then the next section I'm gonna move to is 12.12.100 tree replacement required. And this section, we're actually gonna hold, this is one we're gonna hold on because we need to wait till the urban forest manager returns to get more feedback on that. So, and this is the chart and everything else, so we're.
Can I just make a couple notes to
Yeah.
consider when you do talk with
Absolutely.
the urban forest manager? First of all, going back to the issue of the life expectancy being 3
Yes.
years, and the tree commission noting concern that it might not be realistic to estimate the life expectancy with that level of precision. I think we need some more information on that. And then in C, or I guess it's C, section C here, I think, I don't know how it works currently in terms of removing invasive trees versus undesirable trees, and whether there's a difference in replanting requirements, but there might be a change here moving from undesirable to invasive. And it seems like if something is truly invasive, we might want to encourage people to remove it aside from requiring any sort of replanting, versus an undesirable tree where we would definitely want a replanting. And then moving down further. Sorry, I have one more thing, but I can't read it on my computer because for some reason it only displays on my phone. An E. Or F, I guess the changed F.
It looks like we're missing E.
Yeah. The one that has E crossed off
Right,
and then
yeah.
F. Does this provide an incentive to replant on private property versus, I mean, one of the things we talked about was not just increasing the fee to make sure it covered the maintenance expenses, but also to consider actually encouraging people to plant on private property versus just paying the replacement fee. So if we could take a look at that,
I had a similar
I think
question.
that would be useful.
Okay. All right.
And on, I'm sorry, Casey, are you done?
I think I'm done. Go ahead.
And backing up to C that Casey had mentioned, I'm not, I would prefer, instead of, unless the city manager authorizes the planting of a lesser species, and we don't know what that is, and we don't know how it gets there, I think I would prefer to expand so trees are equal or superior to the removed tree. Right now, it's the quality, the shade potential. We could, I can send this around, we could add a few other words like biodiversity, native species, climate adaptation, the same things we talked about in the
Right.
overall goals of the ordinance and in the, what are we encouraging, rather than leaving it sort of, it's either on a list or somebody decides it's not on a list. So I can
Yeah,
send something
and this
around
whole
on that.
section, I think, is one we're gonna come back to, so, yeah. All right, so unless there's other things like Councilwoman Costick had to raise for the urban forest manager in this section, I think we're moving to page 20.
There's actually one thing on 19, which I don't
yeah.
think is that. So
Okay.
at the very bottom of page 19, it's G3, new G3.
Uh-huh.
there is a presumption that the death, hazardous condition, or significant decline in health of any tree on or near the property that is covered by a tree protection plan within 2 years was caused by the construction. So, I don't know. If the tree protection plan was good, how do we end up there?
Mostly violations of the tree protection plan.
But on or near the property? I mean, that's.
Yeah, any tree that was, again, it's typically the trees that are considered to be protected as part of the plan, so, within 50 feet.
Right,
would be the
it's
same.
only trees that the urban forest manager determines, would be impacted by the construction and require protective measures.
Right, so this
Yeah,
seems
it's
broader
covered in
than,
the tree protection plan.
this seems broader than that. To me, it should just say any tree that was in the tree protection plan
It-
that dies within 2 years would be covered, but not any tree anywhere on the property, which could be
It
150 feet
says,
away.
any
Unless I
tree
misread.
on or near the property that is covered by a tree protection plan. So it's
Okay.
those defined within those protected.
Okay, never
Yeah,
mind.
so it's not just
Gotcha.
generally around.
Sorry, I missed that. I apologize.
And we do have H there that
Yeah, I
is
like
trying to
that.
get, kind of an open end, trying to get at ways that we reduce the replanting requirement for certain criteria.
Yeah. Anybody have any comments on H?
I think that may not be the right
Right.
list, but I like that it's in there.
That was
Um,
just a placeholder.
Just a
Yeah,
placeholder.
and I
But we
appreciate that.
generally like the direction. All right.
And on I, I like that it says, spells out what the tree replacement fund can be used for, and
Mhm.
therefore what it can't be used for, but I guess I would defer to all of you whether this needs to be in the ordinance or whether this can be in a regulation.
Okay. Then we got rid of 12.12.105, the pre-planting of replacement trees. And
There's a, is it C3 about contributions to the fund?
this,
And never mind. I was looking at a couple of things that we might want to hang on to but we don't have to do that right now. We want to eliminate the program, but at some point, we want to have something else in its place.
and that doesn't necessarily have to be in the ordinance either.
Right, and it doesn't have to be in the ordinance,
I think we
yes.
have to think about what
What's
should be
in
in
the
our
ordinance,
ordinance.
right.
And then as we're developing strategies regarding the tree canopy and other programs like that, what can be put into that?
Right.
Because then we have much more flexibility if it's programmatic or in the admin regs versus what's in the ordinance.
Right.
All right, so then we're at 12.12.110, appeals from permit decisions.
For A, I think that I just like the city attorney to take a look at that and make sure that doesn't need to be, it seems like it might need to be
Yeah.
reworded to not allow appeals for the hazardous trees.
Mm-hmm. And that's an A?
Yeah. I think this is a holdover from when we had the waiver.
Yeah.
So just look at a change there.
All
Okay.
right. And then on the next page, 23E, the city attorney and tree commission strongly recommend not allowing appeals of tree replacement calculations. They believe there'd be a significant increase in appeal hearings. And they don't think it's beneficial. Are we okay with that?
Well, we're broadening out the different categories of replacement now, so that
Right.
could have partially address the concerns
Mhm.
about that, right?
Yep. All right, then moving along, we're on, let's see, section on notices of appeals and hearing notices. Moving to page 24. We just struck.
I forget why we got rid of the on-site review. Can someone remind?
The request of the tree.
That was at the request of the tree commission.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, it would cause delay. We've never actually used it, and it would create potential due process issues because you need a record for the court appeal, and it's hard to record the record of a site visit.
Okay. Then we're on page 25, chapter 12.12, 120.
Sorry, can I
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
two
sorry.
more things on page 24.
Okay.
On H,
Yes.
I just wondered, is there a requirement for how fast an appeal hearing has to be held, or is that information that should be included? I think there was some information when I was looking through about sort of the process of if there's an appeal, you have a hearing, but I just wanted to make sure there was also a requirement that the hearing happen in a reasonable amount of time.
There's no specific requirement. We schedule them, as quickly as possible.
Okay. And then K, depending on what we decide to do regarding the tree protection plan permit appeals, that may need to be modified.
Okay. And then the next chapter is 12.12.120, criteria for tree removal permit decisions. And this is another place we need the urban forest manager's input. So unless there's big questions, overarching questions to ask of the urban forest manager, as they can look at that section, we're gonna put a pin in that one.
I don't want to lose the concept that we want to clarify, is it the tree commission, the urban forest manager, or both that uses these when they make decisions?
It's both, and it does say, we use city manager rather than urban forest manager in the language there.
Okay.
And yet we heard that in practice, the tree rating chart is what is actually used in the field, so I think we decided we wanted to see that clarified.
Clarified to?
As to if this is just for the tree commission, or if this is for the urban forest manager.
Make sure that's spelled out.
Make sure that's clear,
It
based on
is
what the
spelled out
practice
there
is.
in paragraph A.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was possibly going to be part of the discussion that the tree commission had as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we're on 12.12.125, notification of tree protection laws required prior to sale of real property. I don't think there were any changes really to this section. And then the last.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
quick question?
Mhm.
Do we need the full text of the notice in the ordinance if there are going to be regulations anyway?
This could be moved to regulations.
Okay, let's recheck this chapter and move what we can to regs.
And if I could just say real quick, that rather than saying the agents on A in that section, should go to GCAR, which is the association that all the agents have to belong to. So that way, all the agents get it, rather than having to make sure,
Every
question
single-
whether or not an agent got it.
Thank
Good
you.
idea.
All right. Then 12.130, violations and penalties, enforcement. Anything here? And then I think the other thing we'll put a pin in is the duties of the urban forest manager. I think that's also something that we would like to discuss when they are back. And think about this in conjunction also with the canopy, our tree canopy goals. So with that, I think we've gone through our first cut of the work session. I moving forward, as I said, in January, I'd like to be able to wrap this up. When the urban forest manager returns, hopefully he can work with the tree commission and we can iron out these other sections. In addition, I would ask Councilmember Costick, Kovar, and Dabala to get input from colleagues on these other sections and different wording things, and then we could, if we could combine all our suggestions into one document. I think Councilmember Kovar may have started that already today, which was excellent. And that way, we can also give that to Ms. Braithwaite and to Jan when he returns for their input. So our homework assignments get to Councilman Dabala, Costick, and Kovar. Any other changes or things before the end of November, they will compile it, give it to our Director of Public Works and our Urban Forest Manager when they return, so that when we get back from our recess in January, we're able to take this up again. Sound good? Awesome. We are now to signs. Our discussion of amendments to the Tacoma Park Code, Title 11, Section 11.04060 regarding placement of private signs and advertisements in the public right-of-way. And I think I'm going to turn it over first to the city attorney, and then we will have, and again, this is just a work session and a discussion of the memo you prepared for us and where we are on this.
Okay, so just kind of
Oh,
some back.
yeah, we have copies over here. Sorry, they should be over here now. Yeah, sorry, something happened earlier to our copies. Thank you.
So some background on the constitutional parameters of regulating signs in the right-of-way. Generally, local governments are prohibited from regulating non-commercial speech based on the content of the speech. And for hundreds of years, commercial speech was not recognized as protected by the First Amendment. Our current ordinance was written during that period. In the 70s, the Supreme Court started recognizing the protection of commercial speech, and in 1980, it issued a decision that kind of laid out a test for whether regulation of commercial speech was constitutional. First, if commercial speech is fraudulent or illegal, it's not protected. For legitimate commercial speech, the regulation or regulation of commercial speech must advance a substantial government interest, and the regulation must be narrowly tailored to promote that interest, this is known as intermediate scrutiny. And public safety and aesthetics are recognized substantial government interests. In 2015, the Supreme Court issued a decision that said that any content-based regulation of speech, which means any regulation that requires you to look at what a sign says to enforce the ordinance, is subject to strict scrutiny, which means that essentially it's presumed unconstitutional, it must serve a compelling government interest, and it must be the least restrictive means of regulation possible. And in the First Amendment context, ordinances subject to strict scrutiny almost never are found to be constitutional. This 2015 case, the court didn't address the issue of whether regulations that distinguish between commercial and non-commercial speech, which are inherently content-based, result in strict scrutiny. But that is a potential implication of the case. In addition, the law is unclear whether the government can treat different types of commercial speech differently without triggering strict scrutiny. So therefore, any ordinance that would treat commercial and non-commercial speech differently, and particularly any ordinance that treats different commercial messages differently, exposes the city to potential litigation and liability. And the safest approach to regulating signs in the right-of-way would be to limit the regulation to time, place, and manner restrictions. And examples of those would be the size, the duration of posting, the location, the method of posting, and requiring a permit as long as the permit is, content neutral, or the criteria for the permit. So that's kind of a nutshell where we are. And that, I understand why it seems unreasonable to, prohibit signs that we all think are innocent. But the trick is you have to look at what these signs say to determine whether you like them or not, and then you run into constitutional issues.
And so right now, looking at the current ordinance that we have on our books, if we were to go with time, place, and manner as the structure, we sort of have that, but it needs to be cleaned up a bit in terms of updating. Is that your recommendation?
Yes, it definitely needs to be updated, and we would have to eliminate the distinctions for certain types of signs, so that everybody would have to play by the same rules.
And if we could unpack a little bit, I know we had a resident also talk about time, place, or manner, just like unpack that a little bit, examples of what we could think about.
Well, one is duration, and that is in there, but requiring that the sign indicate when it was posted, and that way you can, neighborhood services could tell whether a sign has been up too long by looking at it. And if there is no date, then it's in violation. It can be removed. We can also, designate, how far it has to be from the roadway for safety purposes. We can, I mentioned signs. We can say they can't be over a certain size, and we can talk about the method of posting. I know one concern is that if something's, pasted on something in the right of way, it's too hard to remove.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for all the work you've put into this. I know it's gone back and forth several times, and I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah,
So
it's a complicated issue.
Yeah. And I'll just start out by saying that as someone who has posted a number of signs around town for community information and to advertise community events, I strongly support some of the people who are here tonight talking about the value of that for the community. And so my desire is that we not worry so much about where signs are posted, within reason. Obviously, we don't need huge signs that are going to be blocking a sidewalk or a hazard for drivers. But on the other side, I'm not worried about people posting the signs on utility poles, which is something that has already been outlawed, if you will, by the owner of those poles. But yet that's really the majority of the messages in town that get posted are on utility poles. And I think from a community perspective, that's just fine. I know that some people don't like it, but there's someone who doesn't like just about anything we do. So I'm comfortable with continuing to allow people to post on not just utility poles, but also in the bus shelters. My experience has been that ones in bus shelters don't last very long because people take them down either because they want the information, you just take it with them on the bus, or because they think it's a blight on the community, and so I just post the signs again. But as far as going into, well, you can't post it here or there, I think the community pretty well has taken care of that in the past with when they find a sign to be objectionable, they take it down. There are some people who post signs with a mastic that is very difficult to remove the signs. Those tend to be, and it's coincidental, tend to be commercial signs. Yep. But I think that outlawing the use of glue to post signs makes a lot of sense, whether it's a private sign being put up, something for a community event or community information. It doesn't make sense that it's glued up with something that can't be removed. And I think that addresses some of the concern with the signs that are a blight on the community. We don't need a lot of commercial signs around. We have to think about the carpet cleaning signs that we see all over Montgomery County and other jurisdictions. But I think the requirement to put on a sign, not only a date of when it's posted, but also responsible individual organization for the sign is valuable in trying to trace back a responsible individual for the sign. It may not solve the whole problem because a business may ignore our rules and just do what they want. Again, I'm amazed that we're not able to track back what company is posting the signs advertising carpet cleaning when they have a phone number on there, and we have a lot of vacant houses around that we could invite them to come clean our carpets and find out who gets there. At least we'd have one individual to talk to. There's also people posting those signs. I see them posting signs. I'm surprised that nobody else can see them and stop them and find out who they work for. So it amazes me that we're unable to identify a business that's doing that. So anyways, and again, a duration for how long they can stay up. We put a date on it of when it's posted. We already have in the ordinance a duration. We could argue back and forth about how long. I think, though, reasonable time length makes sense. And I think we should include a requirement that the poster remove the signs at the end of that period. And again, I'm comfortable with having penalties for not doing that, whether it's a yard sale sign or a community event or a business posting. I think a reasonable length of time should be in the ordinance, and there should be penalties for not following the different stipulations we put in the ordinance. So that's where I'm coming from right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Siemens, I'll just easily say I co-sign on to, I'm not sure about the penalties, I still have to think about the penalties. But the other thing I believe you mentioned, but I'd also like to see is size. I do think size does actually cause some issues sometimes when there are sometimes the larger poster paper gets put at an intersection when people are turning or looking at for pedestrians. So I do think we should actually have a size requirement. I don't think it has to be 8.5 by 11. I think it could be a little bigger than that, but I do think some of the larger signs can cause issues. The other thing, and I think Councilman DeBala may bring this up again, or just think about it, we also need to make sure when we update this ordinance that it's clear what businesses can do. We've had some input from Old Town Business Association and CDA about the sandwich boards that businesses can put out information. I know there in the presentation you sent us, there is some guidelines around off-premise and on-premise use of commercial signs. So I think that's just something else we may want to address, because I know many of our businesses do rely on that. And I think it's really interesting that real estate people can do whatever they want. So they must have a strong lobby. Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to say I wish we weren't talking about this. I haven't really heard, this being a major issue. I'd like to associate myself with Councilmember Siemens. I haven't been on the council as long as him, but in my 4 terms, I've never heard complaints about signs. If we are going to put some requirements, I would want them to be as light as possible. That if you're going to require permits, that people can get these permits online. And that if somebody wants to post a sign about, a lost dog or a yard sign, that we should make it as easy as possible for the residents in our city to post these signs. I do agree that people should be required to take them down after a certain time period. And I would like to see, a requirement for people to use biodegradable paper or, something that is not going to really impact the stream. But this, I just don't see this as a major issue for the city. Thank you.
Well, Councilwoman DeBala, since you're next, this actually started with some of your residents.
Well, and so first of all, thank you for sending around that presentation. And if anybody in the audience wants to read 20 pages of PowerPoint on the constitutionality issues and case law, it was actually pretty interesting for me. And what I got out of it was time, place, and manner. And if you have to read it in order to decide if it's legal, that's probably not okay, that piece of a regulation. So I got that much out of it. And I generally agree with what's been put forth so far. I don't see why we would do a permit program. I mean, I just don't see why we would do that.
I'm not advocating
no,
for a
I know
permit,
you're
that's
not.
just an
I'm
example.
Somebody needs to dispose of it, and I'm trying to dispose of it as an option. But tweaking the size, the time, the method, the location, all that makes sense to me. I have a couple of questions. One is, can you define commercial? Because I didn't hear anything about signs until a few weeks ago, and then I heard a lot, and most of it was not seeing what you are seeing about what's commercial and what's not. So that'd be my first question.
So commercial means like inviting somebody to engage in a transaction.
And that's
So-
everything from a lemonade stand on up.
Right.
And there's no way to distinguish a home-based business or a once-in-a-while event versus an ongoing business. Is there any way to cut it?
I mean, as I said in my memo, the law's not 100% clear on that, but certainly you would be, there'd be some risk involved in making that distinction.
Okay. And just for the record, most everybody that got in touch with me didn't understand why we were talking about this, but there were a couple people who did say that they found, just for the record, it wasn't 100%. I did hear some people say that they think that it is aesthetically a problem, and I had more people say that they did have problems at stop signs with the occasional papering over before it got torn down. So just to let my colleagues know what I'm hearing.
I really want to clarify the reason we're doing this is because
elections.
after the last elections, there
Well,
were
we're getting
residents
to
in Ward
that.
2 who requested that we review this. And when Councilmember Schultz sat on this dais with us, this was a repeated issue that he brought up constantly in Ward 6 about signs. And so this, the sign issue, particularly in Ward 6, was something that Councilmember Schultz brought up, like literally, I think, every other month. And the reason that we asked the city attorney to review this was a direct request from residents.
Right, and as far as as far as the election issue, it revolved around where's the right of way.
Right.
And my question last week, was, is there some way, just for the purposes of this sign ordinance, to define either the right of way or to define the private property, to say somehow 10 feet from the road? Or as opposed, just for the purposes of this one ordinance, because the issue was around the location, private versus public property. And this of course is all very useful, but it doesn't address the question that I started with. So just for the next time we go back to this, can we look at whether there is a way to define right of way or define private property, or for the purposes of this, define the public location?
I mean, I understand the problem, and why it's confusing. But the difficulty is that I mean, the right of way is what it is, and it varies throughout the city as far as how far it extends
Right.
from the road. And I mean, so regulating signs on private property is, there's additional issues with that. So I think it would be difficult to kind of combine the two issues. But I mean, if the council wants to kind of encompass private property within a certain distance of the road, then I'd have to figure out, what the parameters are.
So
for
that would be the way that you think would be the cleanest way to, I would appreciate it if you could give it a try, and it might be that my colleagues don't go along with it, but I'd like to see at least what that might look like, and then we can think through the implications. Because right now, correct me if I'm wrong, the city has no regulations that apply to signs on private property?
No, that's not true.
That goes under, it's mostly under zoning code.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you can't have like a blinking sign?
Well, there goes that plan.
I know. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't have blinking signs.
Okay, so there are some.
There are some.
Your disco's out.
Your disco's on. Because I know, because the nail shop every now and then puts on their blinking sign, and we have to tell them to stop it from blinking.
Turn it off. Well, those were the.
No, your posters cannot blink. Can't twinkle, can't blink.
And my third question had to do with clarifying for us all what Pepco, as the owner of most of the utility poles around here, what is their guideline, if any?
So I have a couple things I wanted to say, but that was one. One is Pepco prohibits posting on utility poles. And so one of the things that I'm uncomfortable about is the idea that just because they're not the cities, that we're going to have regulations that allow posting on the Pepco poles when Pepco doesn't allow them. I know that that's an issue somebody else can fight, but I just want to raise that I think we have to be really careful about the fact that the way that the ordinance is written currently, and the way that I know Pepco prohibits that use, that we don't have places to post signs that are legal currently. And so one of the things that, as we go forward, I've had a number of interesting discussions about how do we create places for signs to be posted. One of the ones, and Councilmember Siemens will be happy about this, is I really like to have a deal with the bus shelter folks that allow for a special place for posting signs within the bus shelters, and perhaps even on bus posts. This is a way to take something, people are at bus shelters all the time. They go past them, they're on our major streets. There could be a way that we have a place that encourages the location for signs, again, with some duration limits and that kind of thing. But as we go forward, how you all come out and give direction, I do want to say that I think one of the issues is just that, where do you legally, can you put them? The other thing as you go forward, and it's going to be a long time till you get to those regulations, is what does that mean for the regulation, for the workload of our neighborhood services team? Currently, they take down thousands of signs a year. That information's in our CAFA report. It can, you know, I think 2017 was the highest year that they took down a lot, but we've had ugly sign contests that collected thousands of signs because we had resident complaints about signs, and part of our anti-litter efforts have been taking down signs. Doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of sympathy for lost cat signs and yard sale signs and all of the things that we think of as community signs. So but you know, it's a tough topic when you can't distinguish by content in a constitutional way. So I just wanted to put out the issue of where things get posted is a point that we have to take into consideration, and as you get through the process about what you think is appropriate, just that we will also be calculating what that does mean to the workload of staff. And I appreciate the discussion. The signs are hard. It's just hard. And so it is going to take a point where you'll just have to come up with what you feel comfortable with doing, and we'll see how close it meets the legal standards.
Okay. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. I want to also associate myself with Councilmember Siemens' comments. I agree that it is important to have community signs, and I very much appreciated the comments by Ms. Miller regarding the fact that we may allow signs, but there is really no place to put them, and I think the city manager made a good point on this. I would very much like to see opportunities where we can explicitly make it clear that signs can be placed in those places. In terms of a concern I have, I do want to make sure that we have the capacity to remove signs that cause a danger to sight lines or pedestrian crossing areas, driveways, those sorts of things. And that may get at the size of the signs. But I also know there are some signs, like signs for the Boy Scout pancake supper, and I think I saw a sign for the library book sale that are a little larger, that are typically put up and are not really a big issue. I've never seen them in a place that caused a problem. So I would like to see if we can try to maintain the capacity to have those, and I don't know if there would be a way to allow for signs that are larger like that to require some permission from the city that could be simplistically done. But that might be something to explore. And then I wanted to ask about election signs in particular, because when we were looking, I think it was last week, at the code related to elections, one of the recommendations from the Board of Elections was to not allow election signs in the right-of-way. And so I'm curious how that would interact with this part of the code, and whether there's capacity to have another section of the code that contradicts this section, or whether we would just be looking at a blanket allowing anything, including election signs.
We should not treat election signs differently than other signs.
There was one exception that was talked about. I'm not saying that statement's not always correct, but we did have that provision in the election code that, and I think it was a state provision that allows you to post signs at a polling place on election day.
Yeah.
On the premises of the polling place, so not in the right-of-way.
Which doesn't.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Appreciate all the comments and the comments from the people in the community, which are very helpful. I think just in looking at Ken Sigmund's memo under SAFE policies, where it says allow all signs regardless of content, but with content neutral time, place, and manner, that has a certain appeal to it, but I think it does get complicated. I will say, I've had lots of people in the almost 4 years I've been on the council complain to me about signs, and I've had lots of people pick up and complain about political signs that were posted improperly, and I know there've been concerns, probably less so in my ward, but I've heard Fred talk about that. So it's not just something that has come out of nowhere. A lot of people really are concerned about excessive amounts of signs. I personally think we want to continue to keep the community-oriented kinds of signs that we've talked about, and ways of announcing community meetings and all the other types of small things that people have talked about, like lost pets and so on, which I think can be important. I think with the date certain, there's probably a way to do it. So we could say, for example, if you could only put it up, if it didn't have a date of the event for, say, 2 weeks, and then it could have to be taken down. Or if the date was 2 weeks away, it would be okay. In my experience, it's quite rare for people to take down signs after they post them for events, and they say they will, but it's quite rare for that to happen. But I think that the date-specific kind of thing could work okay, because that would end, or could really curtail, open-ended commercial kinds of announcements, because if you posted something and it didn't have the date, you could take it down. If it posted something that did have the date, once the time period elapsed, you could take it down. They'd have to go put it back up again. Maybe they would, I don't know, but I think the date kind of thing would work. With political signs, I think it's complicated, because if you put it on in your private yard, I suppose it's fine. You could leave it up for as long as you want, as I understand it. If we had the 2-week thing, I don't know if that would then mean that signs could be anywhere in the public rights of way. And I have a lot of people have complained about that, and the sight lines at intersections. On the other hand, if we had a size limit, then many of the political signs are larger than that size. As far as the question of the unusual rights of way, maybe we could say something like, restrictions exist in the right of way, except in cases where what's commonly thought of as being someone's yard, even if it isn't, that they could still do it. I don't know whether there's a legal way to do that. Just a couple other things. The sidewalk signs that restaurants and stores have, those sandwich signs, of course, those would be bigger than whatever size restriction we might have. So I don't know whether, Ken, maybe you can answer this or get back to us on this. Would it be possible to have a general rule and then say, but you need a permit? If you get a permit, you can have a bigger one, and allow those kind of commercial establishments that would want it to get a permit for a bigger sign? You don't have to answer right now.
I mean, we could, but then we'd have to allow permits for other sandwich board signs.
Right. I don't think that many people would be putting them all over the place on their own sidewalks, and it'd have to be done in a way that wasn't disruptive. I agree with what Councilmember Seaman said about the glue, not allowing that. And I think whatever we allow, if there's a safety problem with the sign, regardless of the size, I think we should say it's okay to remove it, so that if it's obstructive in some way. I'm not sure how I feel about putting up a special place to put signs, because that's only going to be in certain parts of the city, and so we're basically, well, it's not going to be where there are no bus stops, and it's not going to be where there are no stores and things like that. It's not going to end up just in people's neighborhoods. So people who live near bus stops and commercial areas.
It could be in some other format, though.
Right. But all I'm saying is I wouldn't want it to be done in a way where that's only going to be in some parts of the city and not others. And it's hard for me to imagine it wouldn't end up like that. Let's just say that. I don't care too much about Pepco. When they're nicer about their projects, then fine, we can police their polls if they want, but that's not a concern of mine. The only other thing is, if we say we're going to allow any kind of sign as opposed to the restrictions we have, and maybe we're going to allow it for 2 weeks, there's nothing to stop somebody from putting up something extremely hateful, which is totally protected by the First Amendment, and that would have to be.
No, actually,
I can't imagine how you could stop that.
we can take down we have taken down hateful signs. I mean, there's been anti-immigrant signs that, I mean, if it goes to hate speech.
This is a city attorney issue.
Yeah.
Sir.
it could be a message that many of us would find very offensive, which would,
Oh, well, yeah, it's
which would clearly be protected by the Constitution.
Right, but there have been signs that we have actively taken down, like when there were false signs about ice raids, we went out and immediately took them all down, because that
I
was.
don't know, could we keep doing that?
Well, I mean, if they were, if they were fraudulent, that's.
No, but no, I'm not talking about fraudulent, I'm just talking about someone expressing an opinion that they don't like this particular group, that you're
Yeah, I
allowed
mean,
to do that.
It's very, it's
Right.
tricky to.
But we could now.
No.
Well, because we allow no signs except for signs that are about daycare and other things, right?
No, we prohibit, right now, it's commercial signs that are,
all right.
that are limited.
Okay, so if we're selling items. But all those things aside, I'd like us to find a way to do the content neutral time, place, and manner. I think that seems like the cleanest way to do it. But just watch really closely if there's an explosion of commercial signs, and then we maybe have to think about something different. So,
Great.
hope that's helpful.
Thanks. Councilwoman Searcy.
We will have an implosion of commercial signs. In Ward 6, we buy everything, houses, cars, gold, and those signs are all over the place. Palm readers, people who are selling things, the signs run clean up all of the Pepco poles. You can find them on stop signs. You could find them everywhere. So my predecessor was not wrong in stating that when you open Pandora's box, all heck break loose, right? Now I'm torn on the matter because I understand the challenges that people experience when you are trying to get information out to residents. When I was with NHGCA, there's no way to post on the listserv and reach all of the people that you need. So we have to buy news boxes, place them around the neighborhood, and put flyers in them so people would understand and could gather the information when they're walking their dogs or whatever. So I kind of understand both sides of the dilemma. If we make it a free-for-all, we will get a free-for-all, and it will mean that we will spend a lot more money as a city cleaning it up, when maybe we need to take a more collective approach to thinking of alternative places for folks to post signage. Maybe it is working with various neighborhood associations to provide them with funds so that they can have newspaper boxes that they can strategically place in their neighborhoods next to bus stops, not just metro buses, but actual school bus stops are the ideal place to let people know about something. So trying to figure out alternatives such as that, where you have ways for people to disseminate information, but it's in a contained manner, I think is important. We also have a number, I know in my neighborhoods, we have a number of some of the larger billboard bulletin boards. I don't know if others have them. We have a lot of them and they're not used. So things that people lobbied for, a decade or so ago that may not be in the best places anymore, may not be in some of the major walkthroughs for folks. We may need to take a collective look if they're down in parks and things like that where people aren't frequently walking past, taking another look at those bulletin boards and figuring out whether or not they're in the right places and whether or not we need to move them. Maybe turn them into an art project. I've mentioned that. Give them some new life, put them somewhere else, and then make them a focal feature, but also something that's usable for people to put signs up. So I'm of the mindset no to allowing signs to go on Pepco poles or any stop signs or things like that. That's creating chaos. But yes, to kind of giving people the proper parameters for being able to put signs up. So for example, maybe we do limit the size. We require folks to maybe have stakes so they're in the ground and not necessarily posted on the Pepco poles, or we provide them with some other alternatives. I get it when you have a child that has lost their dog. If I lost my dog, I would probably litter this entire city and I wouldn't care who complained. But I think it is important for us to keep in mind the potential magnitude and the fact that we will need to increase our neighborhood services staff to meet the demand, because we're all guilty of it. You put a sign up and you forgot where you put it, and then the next thing you know, it's been there. The cat has been found 5 weeks ago, and yet that sign is still up. So trying to make it as easy as possible for enforcement, but also trying to provide people with the information they need, so that they could post the information that needs to be posted in a way that's not prohibitive. So I did a lot of talking late at night, but that's my 2 cents.
I just want to note that, I mean, right now, the commercial signs that are everywhere are prohibited. So I don't think anything we do is going to lead to an explosion of signs, because I don't think those people know or care whether we have a law. So I don't see that as a risk to.
So
Can I ask one other question?
It is, but it really differs by neighborhood and type of street, where the commercial signs are and that kind of thing. I mean, so there's a geographical issue that's related to the signs. So
Can I just ask, is it a violation for a resident just to take down a sign at any time, as long as it's not on private property?
Not a violation of the city code. I mean, it could be considered vandalism or theft, but.
Well, so even at the moment, or if we pass some version of what we're talking about, can any resident just walk around anytime they want and rip one down, or would they have to wait until after the date that the thing advertised?
We prohibit a resident from tearing one down?
I mean, again, that would be, I think the issue would be whether that's a property crime.
If it's already illegal to be on a Pepco pole, is it a crime to take down something that's illegal? Man, that's like an LSAT question. Councilman DeBala.
Yeah, I was going to go back to something that Councilmember Seaman said about commercial signs, carpet cleaners, et cetera, that don't have a name and a number on them. And are they currently illegal?
Yes.
Yes.
And so theoretically, if code enforcement wasn't doing 27 other things, these signs that are.
They do take them down.
Yeah.
take them down, but they're really hard to take down. They take an enormous amount of actual energy because of the paste.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things that are going on there. So that's not an ordinance thing, because we've already got that. Okay, I just wanted to get that one straight.
But I do think it's important to keep in mind how we're defining commercial. And
Right,
this
and
keeps
that's why-
trickling into a lot of things that we've been talking about, from the dog park to the signs. If we don't have a clear definition of what is commercial, like someone mentioned babysitting. Like, let's say you have a teenager that wants to babysit and they want to put signs up. How is the teenager offering their services as a babysitter different from a daycare business that puts their signs up?
And it doesn't really matter, because we cannot, constitutionally, we cannot distinguish between
Right.
private and commercial.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I think the general sense of the majority of council is to direct the city attorney to go back, look at the ordinance.
Do everything we said.
And we need to update it. You know, it was done in 1970s. There's very confusing parts of it. There's obviously things that are, go against the Supreme Court decision. We want to look at time, place, and manner. There's been, I think, a lot of consistency. Councilwoman DeBala had a specific request regarding right-of-way to see if that can be defined and bring that back to council. And then we'll revisit this again.
Okay.
So, thank you for your work on it. And I do just want to reiterate the memo, and particularly the PowerPoint you circulated was very helpful in getting into the details of this issue. So, and thank you to all the residents who've communicated with us on this issue, and we'll bring it back again. And so just to clarify, because I think there were some misunderstandings, and I thank Councilwoman Costick for clarifying this on some of the listservs. This is a work session, so we discuss it. No voting is happening. We will definitely have at least one other work session, or possibly two, when we get a draft ordinance or changes. And then when we change an ordinance, there are 2 votes. So it's not a resolution we usually vote on once, but an ordinance we vote on twice. And we always notice that in the agenda and everything. So, and I know many of my colleagues put out weekly updates and things, and everything is on the city website as well. So this is when we would get to an actual change in an ordinance and voting on it, will be down the road after a number of other discussions. So thank you all, and have a good night. We'll see you Monday night. Oh, no, actually, I'm sorry. Wait, no, it's you. Tag, you're it.
Thank you, Mayor.
I know, he's it. It's him.
Thank you, Mayor. You all can go home now, but I'll finish this up. On Monday night, we're going to be having appointments for some of our committees and commissions. We have Board of Elections coming up, and Parking Task Force, and the Council Compensation Committee. Will have candidates for each of those, or applicants for each of those, and they'll be coming before the council for a vote. Read your emails and be prepared to talk about it if you have any concerns or ideas. Thank you, and we'll see you Monday night. That's November 18th at the usual time.
All right. Good night, everyone. We're adjourned.